All right, folks, we're ready to go. The next item on the agenda, item C1, is receive the Water Reclamation Facility Program update and provide comments and direction deemed appropriate. And we'll look to Rod to give us an update, and we've got some things, a little bit of input.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you.
This is going to be a team effort. I'm going to kick things off, and then members of the WRF management team will add in as we go along. So on July 11th, City Council meeting, your body made several motions to direct us to immediately begin discussions with the Coastal Commission and the Regional Board to determine the feasibility of constructing a facility west of Highway 1 at or near the existing plant site, to look at, start evaluating costs and feasibility of constructing a WRF, including recycling at several sites, Giannini, Righetti, and a site west of Highway 1. And then to direct staff to report on the RFP process for a design-build project, and to evaluate outreach options and prepare further discussion with the community on these items. I'm going to start with our update that we had. We had a meeting with Coastal Commission staff this morning. 9:30 this morning, we met with the district director for Central Coast Region, Dan Carl, and supervising coastal planner, Kevin Kahn. With me at that meeting was our city manager, Marty Lamelli, Scott Graham, community development director, and members of our project management team, Mike Nunley, John Rickenbach, and Eileen Shields. At the meeting, we discussed with them the recent activities related to the project, including the project background, our peer review process, how we got to the option of looking back at a site west of Highway 1, the regional board's input to this process, and they're encouraging us to move this project along. And your direction from that July meeting that I just went through the preceding. We discussed the Coastal Commission staff concerns and what next steps would be followed. So some of the takeaways from this meeting, and you have these notes with you. And there's copies available for the public in the back. Sorry. Key takeaways, that coastal staff is open to the possibility of discussing permitting at a site near the existing wastewater treatment plant. But as we all knew going into the meeting, there's no guarantees of approval. That will be a decision left to the commission itself. The permit approval will be a challenging process because there was a previous denial in that area for a project in 2013. Staff talked to us about the fact that the commission will be needed to be convinced that a new project will successfully address some of the issues related to the previous denial, and how this project is different from the previous project, how it addresses coastal hazards, how it addresses consistency with our LCP, visual issues, and archaeological issues, how we can make mitigations for all those points. Coastal staff committed to working iteratively with city staff to address these issues as appropriate and work with us through the permitting and planning process. I want to say that it was a very collegial meeting, I think we continue to have the City of Morro Bay as a great working relationship with the coastal staff planners. The The coastal team promised to help us engage with their material area experts to make sure that we're talking the same numbers when we're talking about sea level rise, flooding issues, make sure we're both on the same page, and we're comparing apples to apples, and there's no inconsistencies with the studies that we are using. One of the areas that we're looking at is the area near the Tang Farm site, and actually on the Tang Farm site. They committed to looking at the, there may be some permitting limitations with that area pursuant to the Coastal Zone Management Act, and the CCC staff is going to investigate and get back to us as soon as possible on that. They believe that the permitting process for a location west of Highway 1 will take longer due to the level of public scrutiny and the previous denial at that location. The time frame for permitting on the outside city sites would be less, primarily because we'll be using the county's LCP, which already anticipates wastewater treatment plants in the agricultural zoning, so it's already addressed in the county's LCP. All of these sites are subject to appeal to the Coastal Commission, and we'll need to work with our brothers and sisters in the planning department to coordinate our LCP update to make sure that everything is consistent on both sides with what we're doing. Next steps that we really need to take is complete this, the cost and site analysis, review the technical assumptions related to coastal hazards with the CCC staff, discuss findings with the CCC staff, and report back to council. We are anticipating that the council will provide direction relating to the final project site. The next area that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, I'm going to bring John Rickenbach to talk about an update on the outreach efforts. Following that, Mike Nunley will talk about the design-build process and bring John to the podium. He can also add in anything that I missed on the Coastal Commission meeting.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I think Rob did it just right. I think you hit the high points, but if they have questions, I can certainly fill in on that too. One of the things that we were asked to do is provide outreach. And in assessing that, we first sat down to figure out, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? What are we trying to accomplish? And of course, part of that, to understand how to move forward, talking with the community in general, we really need to have a good feel from Coastal Commission and Regional Board. We did talk to Regional Board, now to Coastal Commission, but we sat down and tried to figure out some goals, what we're trying to accomplish there. I think the number one goal in the outreach is we're trying to inform the community and the regulatory agencies about where we are in this process. And that means not only telling them where we are, but to try to make sure people understand where we aren't. And I think there's a lot of information floating around. A lot of it's right. Some of it's not quite right. But I think that's one thing, and I think it's important to understand the reason we're looking at all what we're looking at isn't that we're necessarily away from South Bay Boulevard yet. I think you have asked for information to allow you to make a decision about whether or not to move from the South Bay Boulevard site based on cost, based on regulatory constraints. So that's what we're trying to bring back and make sure people understand that. Now, we also, in the outreach, want to make sure that if there are feasible sites based on cost and others, what they are and where they are and the degree to which they're relatively feasible to South Bay Boulevard. We also want to make sure people understand what these potential cost differences are and between the different sites and compare them to South Bay Boulevard. With respect to cost, We're still working on that a bit. We should be pretty close to getting a comparative internal understanding of the cost. We have to make sure the numbers work and that they're consistent before we really take that out. But I think it's important for us to understand that question and the coastal question, which we now have a pretty good handle on, before we start reaching out to property owners and neighbors and everybody else in general. So we go in an informed way, because I think the last point of what the input we're trying to get in the outreach is if you understand the relative costs and you understand the relative timing or regulatory constraints of the different sites, give us your input about how you feel those balance in the big picture about whether we should move away from South Bay Boulevard or not. And if so, where does that sort of make sense? We're not really thinking of it in terms of a vote per se, but we want to get a feel for where the community is on that. And so the question then becomes, is it best to reach out in a public workshop setting once we have a report or settings, or provide more information such as we have on the city's website recently to give an update where we're at in this process. We've got some good feedback on the Facebook page there relative to that, a combination of things, flyers and such. So what we plan to do now that we have some better input from Coastal is to flesh out the timing and the outreach program. I think one of the speakers before said, well, we need input on that soon, and I would agree with that. So we're in a position now to lay out a program shortly and inform the community in general about that. There was also in the staff report a discussion of a meeting with Cayucas. I think it's worth also reporting on that. We did meet with Cayucas last week. The purpose of that really was to discuss common interests that we have relative to the continued use of the outfall as they move forward on their project. They informed us where they are in their project. They essentially have land use permits at this point from the county. They're moving forward, and they're going to be building that soon. So they also discussed with the city what kind of permitting is needed to run pipelines through the city, for example, and any other ancillary issues related to their operation. We also discussed in very rough terms what it might mean if the city chose to go back to a site west of Highway 1 and how Cayucas comes into play there. And the reason for that is because there's joint ownership of certain sites. So obviously they weren't going to commit to how that affects them, but they agreed any land that is jointly owned by Cayucas is something that we'll have to work through with them in terms of how to move forward on such a site. And I think that's really the short overview of where we are in outreach. So you can expect to have the outreach actually beginning more publicly quite shortly. And at this point, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Mike Nunley to talk a bit about the RFP, RFQ process in the larger context.
Thank you. I'm Mike Nunley with MKN. I'm the program manager for the Water Reclamation Facility Project. I did want to just briefly touch on the procurement process for design build for the WRF. And this was a question that came up in our July 11th meeting. One thing I'll do is I'll ask the city attorney to jump in if I run astray on any of the legal terminology, also to respond to any questions related to some of the state law citations and some of the other information herein. But essentially the process that we are intending to follow is a two-stage selection process. The first stage is the issuance of a request for qualification to potential design builders. Once they propose, or once they've submitted their statement of qualifications, we'll review those. We'll have a list of criteria. That draft RFQ will be circulated through WRFCAC and will also be brought to council before it's released, so we get good input. After that's released and advertised, then the objective is to shortlist the proposers to no more than 3 teams. And then those teams would be issued a request for proposal. And what they would do is they would prepare their preliminary design information. They would prepare their guaranteed maximum price. We would work with them through that process through a series of what are called proprietary meetings, where we would meet with each of them and work it through design issues and explore creative solutions and that sort of thing. And that would culminate with the selection or the recommendation of a design builder that we would bring back to council. So the one critical thing to understand is one of the questions has been, how fast can we do this? What's the quickest we can go? Your constraint on this is really a combination of your permitting and your financing. Those are your project constraints, and those are really your critical path at this stage. Because you don't want to release a request for proposal to get for designers or design builders to start putting together their guaranteed maximum price until they have enough information to put that cost together. And the EIR is a critical piece of information for that. So they need to see what permit conditions might or other conditions might come through that EIR and might come through those regulatory agencies. So that's the goal, is to be preparing the RFQ concurrently with the completion of the EIR, release it before the EIR is released, and then be prepared to release the RFP almost immediately after the EIR is certified. So that order makes a lot of sense, and that's rough timeline is explained in here. So at this point, I'll turn back to Rob. Or
as we go through this, so any questions from council at this point? To my left? To my right? Marlis?
Well, the only question I had concerned the comment you made about the Dynegy location having permitting location limitations, and I'm wondering if you could explain what those are.
When the project was going through its permitting through the California Energy Commission,
Are you talking about which project?
The Dynegy repowering project, they received a Energy Commission permit. Coastal weighed in on consistent federal and state consistency. Coastal staff didn't know if there was any limitations in that consistency review related to the site. There may or may not be any issues with it. They just wanted to alert us to that and tell us that they were going to research that and get back to us as soon as possible. It may or may not be an issue, but they wanted to make sure we knew about that and that they were going to look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to my left? To my right? Okay. And any further updates on where we're at? Do we want? I know we've got the financial portion of this.
That's the next item, okay. So we'll go over the financial portion. I must say that Mr. Lamelli asked a direct question at the meeting with Cayucas whether they were interested in coming back to work with us on a project together, and they said no thank you. They were too far along with their project to really work with us, and some of their funding depends on a population of less than 10,000 people. They weren't interested in risking that funding, so they did say that they have land available should we want to move north to be next door to them.
Okay.
I'd also like to add one more thing. Rob, you asked if there was anything at Coastal worth adding. This is something not really a surprise, but we did explore the idea, how important is the concept of managed retreat versus reclamation, water reclamation, if you had to pick one versus another. And they said, well, we don't know that, but we know they're both important to us. That is to say that reclamation's a big deal for them. To have the project go forward without a reclamation component early on, or a clear plan to get you there quickly, is an important thing if there's going to be any kind of support, especially at a site west of Highway 1, to move forward. Worth pointing out.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Given that the importance of recycling and reuse, are there any additional studies that we would need to complete before we could accept the plan that's been proposed for reclamation using the injection wells into the Morro Basin?
Yes. There is follow-on work, pilot studying, basically. We need to prove on the ground that the geophysical model that modeled the hydrology is actually true. So we need to do tracer testing to prove out that hydrological model. And that's one of the components in the reuse regulations.
Okay. And that study is already included in the budget and the reclamations report?
We do not have a proposal from the hydrogeologist for that scope of work.
Okay. And
one other point with coastal, this is important too. Coastal staff, we explored the idea, have you permitted projects like this elsewhere along the coastline to allow this to a wastewater project? And they have done things like that recently in not quite the same project as what we're talking about here. But for example, in South Slow County, there's a redundancy project to shore up some definite problems they have there. And there were conditions put on that where they had to show, as a result, show due diligence toward eventually moving away from the coast over a period of 30 years or so. Not to say that that's exactly how it's going to go here, but the staff indicated that if it were to go forward near the ocean, that we'll have to address that possible condition that I know floats out there right now with other coastal projects where they want you to eventually move inland. So if that became an issue here, and we don't know that it will, but if it does, then that becomes a serious potential constraint. If you want to have a long-term project near the ocean, they want you to move eventually inland, that may not work. So that will be a challenge as we try to move forward if we go in that direction. Worth for you understanding that the staff brought it up with us, and we need to make sure you understand that here.
And I have one last question. Are we still going to be able to meet our 2-month deadline? Are we going to be able to complete all the information and be able to move forward at that point?
Our tentative goal right now is to be able to have all the information we need in time for the council meeting of, I think it's September 26th. We expect our cost information to be done sooner. It depends a little bit on the outreach and the outcome. We're going to try to follow up again with coastal staff too. They asked, once you have the fleshing out of a report and some information, to provide it to them so we could work back and forth with that, again, to provide you more information from them, and then for you to be able to go forward. So I'd say tentatively, because if it takes a little longer, it may, but we're shooting for that date.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Marlis. John? Matt?
Yes, Rob and Jeff, in terms of talking with Coastal, in terms of the proximity of the existing 62-year-old plant and then the cement plant, given its physical, slight physical dimensions that are different from the existing plant, and I know exactly in your words they talked about the proximity to the existing plant, but however, the height difference in terms of flood mitigation and tsunami, was that even broached or was it too preliminary?
We didn't get down into the weeds on discussing design features, but as you move inland, typically the ground rises. So the cement plant site is about 2 feet higher than the average elevation of the wastewater treatment plant site. If you go to the other side of the creek, looking at the the tank farm area, that's kind of a similar elevation over there. Less fill required. As you move that little bit east, we're talking we have about a half a foot of flooding versus, in some areas of the wastewater treatment plant, 2 to 4 feet of flooding. So the fill amounts are less. And if you go out there and look at the site, you can see that, because you can see the elevation of where the trailer storage is and how the ground from the wastewater treatment plant going back towards Lila Kaiser rises up to meet that. That is about the elevation of the floodplain right there, that ground elevation at the trailer storage.
We did talk a little bit about the how we would, that's a good example of one of the issues, how we would move forward in a discussion with Coastal to try to address these issues. And to unpeel that onion a little bit, I think the way we look at it, and they look at it too, is we'd go back to what they commented on the draft EIR in 2010 on the upgrade project. Their key issues that they brought up, look at the staff report from January 2013, look at those issues for denial, and sort of create a table. How does the project, if it's going to go here, how does it address these? And are you at the staff level satisfied we're going in the right direction? They thought that was a good way to go, and I think that might be iterative to get there. But that's one of the reasons it might take more time, for example. But we did get to that level of discussion.
And I think when we go back to 2010 and 2013, in terms of the denials, we're talking about oxidation ditch instead of MBR plants, correct?
That's one example of a difference, sure. And we can anticipate a smaller footprint, for example. Site's a little different, elevation's a little different. It could be designed differently. One of the other things we talked about was they had brought up previously in those years visual and compatibility and access, recreational access. That comes into play a bit relative to the ongoing general plan LCP update. So the degree to which a new project could be integrated in a way that does not impede those coastal values, that will be useful information for Coastal to understand to be able to move forward. Whether we can get to that point to their satisfaction relative to the timing of the two efforts is a question, but certainly something we're all thinking about.
And one last question. How valid is the concept/argument of saying that we have a lot of new infrastructure in terms of lift stations that we've just put in the last few years around that area? And if we do have to necessarily move that, that's going to be a huge cost to the city. Is that presented in that way, or do we have to be in another more proactive, positive way?
Well, again, here that's a question that relates to the larger picture of cost. They asked, do you have your cost estimates up? They got it. They get the idea. We're looking at something that's expensive if we don't go near there. They're sympathetic at the staff level. What they want to get a feel for is how much more expensive it would be, because at the end of the day, they are sympathetic to the idea that it's a balance, and there's an understanding that, you know, if it's too expensive far away, there may not be a project that achieves some of the goals that they would want. So the idea is, if it's not all that different cost-wise, then they'd say, well, then maybe it makes more sense to go away from the site. So until we have those numbers down a little bit better, but we come back to them, and the lift station proximity and the ability to locate things in that way obviously comes into play on cost, and they understand that.
I'm sorry, could I ask one more?
Keep going.
In terms of this state funding that we can be or we could be accessing, in terms of cost and the proximity to those injection wells, that would go hand in hand with being able to attract that funding, yes?
Well, I think, yeah, Rob, you can speak to that better.
One of the things that made our project attractive from the federal side to EPA was that it included water reclamation. I think without a water reclamation component, our project is not doing what is minimally required, does not typically these days meet the standards for additional outside money.
Rob, when did we apply? When did we apply for that WIFIA?
When did we send in a letter of interest? In May, I think.
I believe it was early April.
Early April.
Okay.
Sorry. So the complete application will be due a year from their announcement of the project. They funded, or they are accepting applications from the projects that they have funding for. So they are excited about the ability to deliver a WIFIA loan to the city of Morro Bay. So they want to work, EPA staff wants to work with us on delivering a project like we had sent in a letter of interest for.
I guess to go along with that, then that would be a bargaining, not necessarily bargaining chip, but necessarily a check on our side when we go to Coastal and present this project. In terms of funding, in terms of our end result, that could be something that we use in terms of attracting a positive outcome.
I think it all plays into the story that we have the interest of a variety of agencies that are interested in a project that provides reclaimed water and adds to the water resiliency of Morro Bay.
Okay. Sorry, keep asking. But if we stayed with the South Bay site, would we possibly lose that sort of funding if we did not do off the bat injection well, the injection well part of the project? I
think without water reclamation, this is my opinion, and it's based on what the agencies have told us. That the regional board told us in a meeting here that they would not support funding for a project that did not have water reclamation. EPA has said the same thing with their money. Options for funding a project without state or federally backed low interest money or grants is the open general obligation bond market, and maybe when we get into the financing picture we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that costs quite a bit more. I think in the rate study you saw the rates go up about $50 a month using conventional financing for those projects.
Okay, great, Matt. Thanks. Red?
Rob, how important is the WIFIA loan? I understood that we're also eligible for a state revolving fund loan. Is there a difference in percentage charged for those two?
Right now, the WIFIA loan is about 2.6% interest rate, and the state revolving fund is 1/2 the GEO bond rate, and I don't know what the GEO bond rate is right now. Maybe so it's probably about 2%, or the GEO bond rate is about 4%. So maybe we're at 2% for.
I think it'd be slightly above that.
Okay, so
2.25 or so, maybe up to 2.5, right in that kind of general range.
So we're in the same ballpark with the two funding sources. The issue with the SRF funding is it's overextended. There are more projects that want funding than there is funding available for. That's where the WIFIA money would come in. It would pay 49% of project costs. We still need to look for other funding sources. With reclamation, we become eligible for things like the Smart Water program through the Bureau of Reclamation that could pay, 20% of total project costs, grant funding. Without reclamation, we're not eligible for that project, for that grant. So I think it opens up a lot of doors by having reclamation in the project.
How about the Prop 1 water bond, 2014?
Prop 1 water bond is, for the most part, been used up. There's another water bond that's on the horizon, the next water bond. That was committed to very large projects that were shovel-ready back in the 14-15 timeframe. There's a little bit of regional money that's still available that'll be doled out through the earworm process, the integrated water management plan effort. And it will be for construction. The problem with construction dollars is we need to be shovel ready to get construction dollars. So we need to have a environmental document and basically ready to go with a project. We're not quite there yet. We have received some Prop 1 money for our Master Water Reclamation Plan. We received the maximum $75,000 grant for the preparation of that Master Water Reclamation Plan. But for the most part, construction dollars for Prop 1 have been obligated, and that's why the legislature and the State Water Board is looking at a new water bond that'll be coming up probably in the next year.
Okay, so 2018.
Yes.
Okay. And my last question, where is the tank farm site?
Almost directly across from the existing wastewater, across the creek to the south. So there used to be some oil storage tanks right on the Dynergy property. If you go to the bridge on the bike path and look to the east from there, that's about where that area is. And then there's some land further to the east of there that is also vacant Dynergy property. That would also be something that we would want to investigate to see if that's appropriate for a WRF site. So it's in the vicinity of where our recharge wells would potentially be. So it's convenient. It's in proximity to one of our major lift stations, so we could intercept that water and not have to add another a large pump station. We would just add a smaller pump station to get kind of the northern area of town to that site.
And would that property be readily available for us to purchase from Dynergy? Is it?
It's for sale. But as I always mention, the city has ways to acquire property with or without a willing seller.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Rob, it makes me think. One question is, in terms of both of these sites, whether or not we increase those to look at the other sites we've looked at, be they Rigetti or the Giannitti site. But if we look at just the cement plant site and the PG&E Dynergy property, if we decide to go towards those two sites, can we do the EIR simultaneously? And if we do, what's the give and take there?
John,
Okay.
the planner will answer that.
Sure.
question.
The answer is sure, yes. The idea being you can scope the EIR to do whatever you want. But if you're asking the question, can you look at an EIR that considers multiple sites as the potential project location? Is that the question?
No, because I think longitudinally, we have an EIR from the existing wastewater treatment plant that we will be able to use parts of, possibly. But then going along with that we'd have to do a new EIR for the cement plant site, and if that didn't go through, we'd have to do one for the Dynergy site separately. But can we do those both separately but simultaneously?
Yeah, what you would do in that situation, this is a logistical CEQA question, you could do an EIR that considers both sites simultaneously as dual project descriptions, if you want to look at it that way. So one or the other site could be chosen. You could do that with multiple sites if you wanted to. There's a cost and a time issue, obviously. It makes more sense to do it something like that than to do them sequentially.
No, and I guess that's what I'm leaning towards. Monetarily, what would that be roughly to do both those simultaneously?
We'd have to work with the ESA, the EIR consultant, but I would say there's a cost increase, but because a lot of the issues are common, you'd be looking at setting sections that are kind of the same. I hesitate to say what it does to the price, but it wouldn't double it. It would be some percentage increase over looking at one site.
But then I guess we would save money in the long term instead of just doing them sequentially in terms of spreading it out over
Certainly.
time. So
Certainly.
we would save money doing it that
No
way.
question.
And plus we'd be able to use some of the existing EIR from the existing site.
No question about that either. Again, where the utility that comes in is mostly on setting information, which, let's keep in mind, is now 8 or 9 years old.
Yes, totally.
So there'd be updating for sure.
Yes, okay, thank you.
I just want to add a little bit to that. I would think that perhaps if we're looking at those two sites, one will rise to the top, and they're not going to be we can't decide on either one of them. I think if both of them are equal, one is going to cost more than the other. If they're both equal for other reasons, one is going to be more expensive, and I believe that one of the sites that will rise to the top.
And I think that's fair. I think it's also fair to say part of our reporting back to you in September, the intent is to look at the relative merits of sites obviously the cost being part of that, to help you make a decision about which way you want to go forward. And I think it's important logistically to be able to pick a place, because we're going to have to update the facility master plan and everything that comes out of that. And that's certainly an important part of giving the team direction to be able to move in one direction.
So, John, while you're there, I know you talked a little bit about outreach, and you spoke a little bit about that, but the request was to evaluate what our outreach options would be. And I don't, so at the end of our 2-month mark, we want to be able to understand how we're going to do that. So I didn't get a feeling that we talked about things that we have done. I just want to understand if the options that I just want to understand what our options are, and in addition to what we've done, whether or not they're flyers. That was kind of a menu approach, and I just want to understand a little bit more detail about that.
Sure. It's what you might imagine, but I think the options obviously are everything from flyers and the website and e-blasts and workshops. Where I think we're in our heads looking at it, we want to make sure that there's value in doing anything before we actually do it. That is to say, we don't want to just do blanket outreach before we have information on which to base the outreach.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a combination of a few things. One, we want to keep updating the website so people understand that. We want to come to the council and explain things. That's another piece of it. We do ultimately, we want to have stakeholder interviews, and stakeholder, I use that loosely. I think we want to talk to the actual property owners, partly to understand level of interest. We do want to talk to neighbors who may be affected. Obviously, we've talked to neighbors in the past, but we want to also make sure it's understood in the context of new information that we might have.
Yeah, I get that.
And how that's done is a good question. I do think we want to have potentially a public workshop or workshops once we have a report to be able to go forward with, to kind of explain and get some feedback on. We do want to focus things. I don't think we necessarily are thinking in terms of multiple, let's call them, giant focus groups, but we want to target the audiences, whether it's individuals or small groups or representatives of neighborhoods or whatever it might be, so we have some degree of being able to have more of a conversational approach in what we're going forward with. We're trying to work that out over the next week or so. Once we have a little bit better cost information, we want to report that back to you shortly.
Okay.
But we want to also move forward, even as we report back to you. It's a moving process.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Sure.
And then, Rob, on the WIFIA loan, so you talked about the timeline as far as when the WIFIA loan, so now they're entering the phase where you can apply for that, as I understood it. So what's that timeline window for the city of Morro Bay to be able to submit that application? And then considering we sent that in early April, we did that on the premise of a different project. So how are we going to put together, if we're looking at another different project, what are feasibilities in being able to submit, even though WIFIA, the folks that are EPA, are saying, this is exciting, we want you to apply. How are we going to be able to meet all that?
So we have a year from the time the announcement was made, so we're about 2 weeks into that year time frame. We will need to have our environmental work near complete. Luckily, in the state of California, we have a very rigorous environmental process, and their staff said they will use most of that information in for the NEPA process, because we're looking at CEQA Plus added on that we would have to do for SRF funding. So a lot of this work we'll be doing for, regardless of where our financing is coming from. it will be a very tight timeline, especially we need to continue to make progress on our project and move forward with that project. So we will keep EPA informed. We will need to bring authorization back to council to apply for that loan because it does require funding. We will be paying, like you do with most loans, for lack of a better term, points on that loan. It's it's $100,000 to make application for that loan, to review all the city's information, evaluate our financial status, to make sure that we can pay back that loan. That's another process that we will have to complete is the rate process to ensure to any lender that we can pay back the money that we're going to borrow from them.
Okay. We've got, I think we'll move on to public comment. This is great for the update. And so we've got about 10, 11 speaker slips, so about 33 or so minutes. First up, Tom Rost, and then Ken Green. And I've been trying to lean into the mic as I speak too, and I just want to make sure when everybody speaks they adjust the microphone so everybody can hear. Thank you.
Mayor and Council of Morro Bay, my name's Tom Rost. I own a home at 640 Sequoia Court with my wife Carol. It was established in 2015 that you could build a plant, wastewater reclamation plant for $75 million. That's a valid figure today, this day. We can verify that because we know that Cayucas is building their plant and it's costing under $20 million. That leaves another $5 million for treatment of lift stations, piping, etc. So we know that is a valid figure. We know that $50 million is available then under that same scenario to build the plant here. The plant here is a cookie cutter. Now, why do I say that? Because I owned a third of an engineering company that operated from Kentucky, Frankfurt, to Fairfield, California. And we built plants like this. So, with the technology today, your plant should not cost you more than, I'm just talking about the plant, more than $40,000. 40 million. I mean, not 40 million.
Yeah, yep.
$40 million. That leaves you another $10 million for force mains, etc. Now, the one thing that was done when you all met with Mr. Enns and Mr. Kuhn, Rick Kuhn, is that it was asked about them coming back. Well, they're not coming back. What you have available to you is probably under $30 million to join them, because you have the infrastructure to do it, and you would have the financing to add to their plant, which wouldn't jeopardize them. And you could do all of that for about $30 million, that I believe. And I think you can verify that with Mr. Kuhn if you all would entertain going back and talking to Mr. Enns and Mr. Kuhn, which some of you have already done. I think you can see that there is a very simple solution to your problem that Mr. Kuhn has developed. Now, to me, it doesn't make any sense in spending the kind of money you're talking about. Your consultants have not been, they've done what you told them to do, but they've not volunteered and said, this is generally what a cookie cutter plant with this capacity performs, what it costs.
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, sir.
I urge you to go and talk to Mr. Kuhn and see the simple solution to your problem, and you can then leave a legacy of being the people that have saved Morro Bay from spending $130 million plus that they don't need to spend.
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude.
That's fine.
Thank you.
That's fine. And your legacy then would be saving Morro Bay.
Ken Green, and then Jeff Heller.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for having me. I'm Ken Green. I live at 371 Cerrito Place in Morro Bay. I'm speaking partly based on conversations that took place in the huddle recently. I'd like to address your process of gathering information and making decisions. We know that council members must make decisions about all manner of issues. The council members cannot be master of all of these issues, so they have several courses of action that they can take before making decisions. One is to study hard and develop a degree of expertise yourselves. Another is to ask staff to do the studying or further studying and to rely on their input. A third course of action is to call on consultants with experience and expertise and rely on their input. Presumably you would take all of these inputs, mix them together, and come up with a decision that's cogent. For a project as expensive as the water reclamation facility, you should be taking all three courses of action. You yourselves should learn about all aspects of the facilities. You should compare your knowledge with that of the staff, and you should compare your knowledge with that of the experts. I have 2 points that I want to make from this time. My first point concerns the need to maintain a sense of reality, especially with respect to the costs. You all are citizens of Morro Bay, and it should be clear to each of you that your personal water bills are going to be affected by the decisions you make. You know the general rule that $1 million of expenditure on the city's part works out to be about $1 a month increase in the bills that we pay. So your $167 million facility would increase the monthly water bills of each one of you by $167 a month, to say nothing of the rest of the members of the city, the citizens. This amount did not seem to register with you until you were faced with a virtual citizen uprising, as it certainly appeared to us. To your credit, you have listened, and you have stopped the process to reconsider. Please bear in mind that the town has okayed an increase of up to $75 a month based on the $75 million that was approved 2 years ago. And you should consider that amount to be an upper limit on what you're willing to spend. My second point concerns your choice of experts. The traditional definition of an expert is a guy from out of town. You have taken that definition to heart several times at the cost of many millions of dollars, and the results have not been satisfactory to the bulk of the citizens of this town. Meanwhile, right within this town, you have a half dozen citizens with many years of experience in designing and building water reclamation facilities.
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, please.
Okay. These people are the founders and members of Citizens for Affordable Living. My request is that you consult with them and take their input seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Jeff Heller. And then Paula Rodke.
Jeff Heller. We talk about costs a lot, and obviously that's the key issue for most people. And I've said this many times, and I'm going to say it again. We won't know the cost of this project until contractors submit proposals. We will not know the cost of this project until contractors submit proposals. If I remember the motion correctly from July 11th, we were looking at 3 sites, Rigetti, Giannini, and possibly 1 or 2 sites west of Highway 1. Why are we spending time talking about South Bay Boulevard?
Are you really going to pay these consultants to do a report on their report to come up with costs for that site, which we already have? The consultants have no motivation to move this project forward. All they have is reasons why Coastal Commission won't approve it at the existing site. All these reasons on what can't be done. There's nobody driving this project to completion, which is a real concern, which just drives up the cost, which makes the people of this committee less likely to approve a 218 vote increase. The peer review that was done recently, number one item was build the plant at or near the existing site. Number one on their list of things to do to bring the cost down. South Bay Boulevard is not at or near the site. We should not talk about it anymore. Their other main point was don't figure on building some plant if you can't get the financing for it based on the demographics of the city. That is why getting contractor prices as soon as possible is so critical. We may not be able to afford any plant. We may have to find a way to limp along with the plant that we have. If we can't qualify for financing because it comes in at $75 million, what are you going to do then? I put together a timeline here that if I were managing the project, this is how I would do it. It gets you contractor prices by the first meeting in November. I'm going to submit it to the record here. Many things can be done concurrently. The RFQ process can and should start immediately for contractors. Performance criteria can be developed for 2 or 3 sites concurrently. You don't need the EIR complete to get prices from contractors. You simply exclude that from the price. You have them bid on the site and the performance criteria. You'll have a hard number for that contractor. The cost of the EIR work can be added in a later date. We have to find out what this is really going to cost. Otherwise, we're just continuing to waste money. I would like to recommend that if these consultants are to be continued with, that every service we ask them to do be negotiated on a fixed price basis. It's my understanding they're still working time and materials. They have no incentive to get anything done quickly. Negotiate a fixed price for the different activities that have been described here that we want them to do. One thing that I think it's a mistake to have them do is outreach. Whoever's done it before has failed miserably. I would recommend that the WRF-CAC or CAL be put in touch with public outreach. I feel like those organizations are more in touch with the people of the city than the consultants or the council. Thank you. I'd like to submit this for record with the milestone schedule included.
Thanks, Mr. Heller. Paula Radke, and followed by Karen Beckman. Paula Radke? No? Okay. Come on up, Karen. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you can... Yeah, thanks very much.
Alrighty. Karen Beckman, Morro Bay. Mr. Mayor, council members. First, I will add my voice to those urging you to seek the most cost-effective solution to our sewage/water needs. I believe the solution lies in choosing the Hanson site. Any other site east of Highway 1 brings added cost in the form of land acquisition and infrastructure. Additionally, I am concerned that the lure, if you will, the promise of building a state-of-the-art plant is clouding the financial issue here. While such a facility would be a tribute to the mayor's forward-thinking leadership, it would not benefit the Morro Bay community. It would, in fact, be a calamity for many, financial calamity. I think the legacy you want to leave is a functioning, affordable WRF. We need to set aside egos, set aside thoughts of what might have been, and focus on reality. Our reality is a design-build project west of Highway 1. Lastly, I am shocked at what I perceive to be the half-hearted, sluggish effort expended by our staff to meet with the Coastal Commission in a timely fashion. It's been 1 month since Morro Bay received the Commission's letter chastising us for considering an additional site and yet staff just today met with the commission. I find it stunning that a citizens contingent from Morro Bay was able to schedule, meet, discuss, and begin addressing the commission's concerns at a meeting held last week. Where is the leadership here? Thank you.
Linda Warwick. Linda Warwick. David Nelson.
Say this is stunning is understatement. I can't believe that we're even considering doing what you're talking about. This is so outrageous that the mayor was the guy who went to the Coastal Commission and said, you're right, we shouldn't do this in a floodplain. Excuse me, I don't know if you believe in global warming, but I do. And the predictions of sea level rise is real. So why would you want to put it in a flood zone is the first thing. I mean, we keep getting these costs, and nobody is really coming up with any hard evidence that these costs are real. I mean, everybody talks how much it's going to cost to run 4 miles of pipe out Choro Creek or Morro Creek Road. I don't believe anything anybody's saying, to be honest with you, after all this. We've gone and we've spent millions of dollars on environmental impact reports on lot after lot after lot. Now we're going to put out a request for a plan to plan and build a plant that we don't even have a clue of what's out there. Why aren't we first before we get a plan? Why don't we get information? It costs you nothing. It costs you some advertising. I think our city manager should be able to deal with that. I think that Rob Lubbock should certainly help them with that. You should be having companies coming begging you to put their plant in our town. I've made calls. Go on Google and just go to sewer plant, and you'll find a company in Georgia that would be glad to talk to you and tell you what they're doing. You know, what they were telling me was going over my head, to be honest. But they have some stuff they call magic cold, where they run water through this, and it has an incredible purifying effect. These plants are out there. The EPA is saying do something special. I'll tell you, again, just as I told your predecessor, because Mr. Irons is the only one up there that even remembers what went down with Cayucos. So let's say that's done. I hope it is done because, I think it's the best idea, but I hope it's done because it's not going anywhere. Everybody's stubborn and they don't want to eat crow for what we've done in the past. But just the point that they're building for so much cheaper just tells me how bad of a job you guys have done. And it might not be intentional, but just to come back to this site is out of your mind. I know that there's a lease restriction, not a lease, a lien.
Deed restriction.
Deed restriction on that power plant saying you can't build anything but a power plant here. So how are you going to take it away from Dynegy? And you're talking about the tank farm is insane. We just put a walking path and a bridge out there for civilians, so now we want them to walk in front of our sewer plant again. You guys have lost it. Well, you better do something different.
Thanks, David. Tina Metzger. And then Terry Simons. Terry? Okay. No, Tina's coming.
Tina Metzger, Morro Bay. Sometimes, this has been going on so long. It almost seems like a Monty Python story. Someone's got to make a movie of this. Good evening, Mayor Irons, members of the council. For the past 18 months, the citizens of Morro Bay have spoken loud and clear against the Rigetti site as the sewage plant site. Loud and clear. Through innumerable letters to the council, public comment during WRF-CAC and council meetings and the scoping meeting with the EIR consultants, personal meetings with individual council members, on and on and on. Your own WRF-CAC, the Citizens Advisory Committee, voted to have you remove Rigetti as a possible site from your list. How long is this going to go on? Do you have any idea how you are affecting the people that have sent you all these letters, that have shown up at all the meetings, all the workshops? And do you think we're really just going to walk away and let you build a plant there? So stop wasting our money. Remove Rigetti from your list of viable sites. We've given you the facts. We've given you how we feel. We've given you all the information about property values, our quality of life. It's time to just remove Rigetti. We've got other viable sites. And I'm speaking this as a professional. I would say this if I didn't live next door to Rigetti. As a planning professional, Rigetti is not a viable site. So let it go. Just let it go finally, okay? Thank you.
Terry Simons. And then Alice Kolb.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Terry Simons. I live here in Morro Bay. I tend to be a cups half full rather than half empty person, and I know that it's hard to hear the testimony that you've just heard, but I, for one, feel that this pause has been a positive thing. I think that it's given everybody a chance to reflect on where we've been and where we want to go and where we need to go and how we're going to get there. I hear the concerns and complaints about the consultant team. I probably share some of those since I've been a planning consultant and a contractor for over 40 years. I've seen some missteps and some stumbles and possibly some falls, but that's okay. It happens. We get up and pick ourselves up and we move forward. I'm thrilled that it's only taken 3 years to go back and talk to the Coastal Commission, and maybe they're actually going to say, yeah, we can work with you guys. Just listen to the checklist that we gave you 3 years ago when we were going to deny your project. Work through that and come up with a project that we can approve. We'll work with you. Wow. That would have been the very first thing I would have done if I'd been the planner for this project, is go talk to the Coastal Commission, because they were the ones who stopped you before. So that's where you start with your new project. I also have a certain understanding of physics and mass through distance, and I can tell you to move 1 million gallons a day of sewage all the way up and over the top to the South Bay site is ludicrous. It requires so much energy and so much facility. How did we ever get there? Okay? Now we have a site. We have a site that the Coastal Commission probably will approve. We have a site that is available. We have a site that may not be the best inland movement site. It may not be the cheapest site, but it's a site that we can work with. Let's get with it. Let's start looking at the site right behind the plant, move some inland, save $40 million by not having to take and move 1 million gallons of sewage a day up and over the top of the hill, or anywhere for that matter. Just intercept the sewer lines where you are, build a new plant, and you're done. So let's move forward. And let's move forward positively with a positive attitude. And then I have one more thing. I know. This should not be a ratepayer rape. This should be a public facility paid for by those who share the capital interest of this community. This is just like a school or any other public facility. I don't have kids in school, but I pay a school tax every year. this should be a capital tax added to the taxpayer roll. It's the most equitable way to pay for a major project like this. I know it's tough because you've got to go through a Prop 13 election, but if you come out and sell this to your community, you'll get the votes you need. Don't burden the ratepayers, burden the property owners. It's the equitable way to do it. And the people who have the multi-million-dollar houses who don't like the idea of a sewer plant in their backyard, they don't mind paying a little more than their neighbors who can't afford it. Ask them. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Alice Kolb, and then Robert Church.
Alice Kolb, Morro Bay. I know that you have many factors to evaluate related to the wastewater treatment plant, but I join some of the previous speakers in saying please do not consider the Rigetti Ranch as a possible site for Morro Bay's wastewater treatment plant. Choosing this site would unfairly devalue neighboring residential properties, and none of the other proposed sites will have that effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Robert Church, and then Steve Stevens.
My name's Bob Church. I live at 702 Ponderosa Street. I feel that you have come up with the most updated sewer plant system that any consultant could come up with. And we don't need that. We need a sewer treatment plant that treats the sewer water to a level that it can be perked back into our aquifer. And I think if you wouldn't have any problem like Cayucas did to go to the people that put in sewer plants and have them design it for us. You don't have to design it. They design them all the time. You don't have to be a sewer expert. You just need to be the mayor and the city council. And then I think you could get this done very rapidly. If you'd stop having all these people get together and have workshops, you have all these time, you have to have our city administrator and all these other people spend their time answering the questions of these people that are now trying to use them as their consultant, and just put it out for bid. You understand what I'm saying? Get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Steve Stevens.
Hi, Steve Stevens. First of all, I just think it'd be a little more respectful if earlier, rather than changing the agenda around and having 80% of the people having to wait a considerable amount of time, if there were people that had to leave here and are unable to address you because they had scheduled, they were respectful of whatever agenda you had put together. So I just want to make that point to begin with. Secondly, I give some credence to what Tom Ross and also Mr. Green said earlier. I would suggest that the city ought to have some type of public ombudsman relative to exceeding a budget. Now, earlier, Mr. Mann brought out the fact that the city attorney billed here at rates 3-4 times what a contracted in-house city attorney would cost, and we don't know where that has ended up. And he was still talking in terms of 2015, 2016 budget, and I think it would be helpful that perhaps an ombudsman, if that budget were exceeded, beyond 20-25%, that a public ombudsman would make a point so that the city council is aware of that. I mean, I really actually feel bad for Scott and Rob, and with all this monopoly money being shelled out here, they're contracted to the city, and so I think we ought to be a lot more sensitive to how our dollars are being spent. I kind of feel that when the gentleman here got up and answered a question, it probably cost us about $175. It's a difficult situation, and I'm appreciative of, you want to be sensitive to how money is being spent, but I think for the most part that unless there is some type of ombudsman representing the citizenry, we're going to end up in a situation where so frequently the council is unaware of what has happened, and I'm appreciative that the question was asked of where that document came from. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Linda Warwick and Paula Radke. Okay, that concludes our speaker slips. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to council. Thanks for everybody's comments. Rob, were you taking notes on any of the comments that you felt you might want to respond to? I could come up with some.
So it seems that there's at least one theme that we just need to get the project out to bid. We agree that we need to get this project out to bid. In our opinion, there is some diligence that needs to be performed before we can get to that point. And site conditions will play a major impact into the cost of those bids. I don't think we can get a guaranteed maximum price from a contractor without knowing some of the conditions that could be imposed through an EIR. Or if we do get that maximum price, we are subjecting ourselves to change orders through the process. Another issue is, and I don't know the answer to this, but I think I do, is can we get legitimate bids if we don't have a way to finance a project? We're going to ask contractors to do a lot of work for us to put a bid together. Maybe it's $75 million and we can pay for it with our existing rate, or $70.3 million, I think, is what we could put together with our existing rates. But if it's $80 million, really, what contractors are going to put that work effort together without a point where they can be rewarded with a contract at the end of that? We have to be able to finance a project to award a contract to a contractor. So I think that, yes, we want to get this out to bid as soon as possible, but we are still a ways away from being able to do that and get that best price for those bids. I think I would go with any questions that council might want to bring up.
All right. John, go ahead.
Rob, could you address the issue that was brought up a couple of times and has been in the past? You met with Cayucas. A number of folks have indicated, I took some notes, the Cayucas cost is under $20 million, quote unquote. The plant can be built, our plant can be built, it's a cookie cutter plant, should cost $40 million. Then the gentleman said for $30 million we could add on to Cayucas. Could you just respond to that whole issue of building next to Cayucas, the issues in evaluating that, the feasibility? You've discussed recently with them their costs. Maybe you could help clarify some of that for all of us.
We talked about projects and their rates. We still don't have the information of what their costs actually are. They are about 1/4 the flow of Morro Bay, so they will have a smaller facility. The process that both communities are looking at are an MBR process. These are modular cookie cutter, if you want to call it that, components that you put together to make your project. So we're looking at a project, let's say it's, because there's common facilities, is 2 times theirs. So we're looking at maybe a $40 million components costs. Now I'm just making up numbers because I really don't know what their costs are really based on. And we all know that we get in trouble when we make up numbers because everybody remembers that last $75 million project that we thought we could build. I've seen numbers from design, build, operate finance companies that said they could build a MBR plant for us for $50 million. And then they throw a 25% contingency on it. I think PERC has made that presentation before.
How long ago?
February. If you look at the detailed cost estimates, that is pretty close to what the plant itself would be in our cost estimates. We have a lot of ancillary facilities, as Mr. Simon's pointing at, pumping all that water up and over the hill to get it to the South Bay Boulevard site. Perhaps $40 million worth of extras that we're looking at to get it there. All that to say, I don't know what it would be to build with Cayucas, or if we could join them there. The indication that I understood was no, but that was my understanding, what they told us in the meeting. So that's the best I can answer that question. I'm sorry.
If I may, I did ask the question as to whether they would want to come back, due diligence on your city manager's part, asking if they wanted to come back since we were now looking at site west of 1. They clearly said no, but they entertained the option of you could buy property next to us and build your own plant. And I also asked the question, correct me if I'm wrong, what was the rate? The rate per month was $92, I believe is what I was told.
That's sewer only. Cayucas.
Right, and I'm just trying to get the questions answered that are out here because I've not met directly, and I know you want to add on, but I just want to ask them another question.
Go ahead.
I'm going to just expose the elephant in the room and maybe put you directly on the spot and say, we continue to hear concerns about consultant costs. I've raised them. People in the audience raise them, and what we pay for to get the results that we've gotten, in some instances, probably has been valuable. But the question going forward is there a less expensive way for the community that would involve, and what I hear there are a couple of vacancies in your department, the opportunity to look at possibly re-engineering your department, and utilizing internal staff through making one of those a project manager or you a project manager, and to do this less expensively, and not incur $10 million or whatever we have planned out in the future of consultant costs. And I'll ask that directly because that's the question nobody seems to get answered out there, and I hate to put you on the spot, but you and I have talked about it privately, so it's not a surprise. And I'll just ask you straightforward your thoughts about that, and I think it's important for the community to hear what you think. So,
first of all, we do other things besides this project in Public Works. It's doesn't seem like it some days. It consumes a lot of our work effort there. The two vacancies, we all know that Rick retired and our associate engineer moved on to another opportunity. Yes, we could restructure the department. I could take on a more active role in the managing the project. I would still need help to do that. We don't have the depth of a private consulting firm to throw everybody on a project and crunch numbers, to create exhibits. We would still need that outside expertise and manpower. To be quite honest with you, we don't have the staffing nor the equipment internally to do everything that would be needed to be done for overseeing every aspect of the project. Could it be less expensive if a city staff member took on a more direct management role? Possibly. It could be less expensive, but I still think we can't get rid of all of our assistants in putting this project together. In addition to the engineering side, we have also the planning, permitting side, and we already know that I would have to rely on our community development department if we were doing that in-house, and we all know the depth of that department also. We're not that deep in our roles, so we would need to seek outside help to assist with that. Yes, we could take on a more active role with additional assistance on the project or in the department, filling these two roles, having either the new senior engineer take on the management role, or that senior engineer take on more of the day-to-day operations, and I would take on more of the project management role. But I still think we would have consultant costs at the end of the day to provide backup. To provide backup and the depth that we would need to respond in a timely manner to permitting agencies, funding agencies, and the like.
The other question is, and you addressed it, and I appreciate, and I think I heard the answer to it, but Mr. Heller's comment about, and others, about going out to bid now and getting a contractor's price set even without an EIR completed. And maybe just one more time I'll ask you to address that. I'm sorry, but it just keeps coming up over and over, and I'm trying to get a good handle on getting the information out to the community, and want to hear your response directly again.
In my opinion, first I'll say what I said again. We are also anxious to get this project out to bid and get it in the hands of the contracting community, because that means it's done. And once you issue a contract, it kind of moves forward of its own momentum at that point in time. I believe, in my opinion, professional opinion, there is risk involved with going out to bid too early. We don't know all of the conditions that could be imposed through the environmental review process on a project. Those could be significant costs. Though that would, if we did get a guaranteed maximum price from a contractor, they would caveat that and say anything that came out of your environmental review would be a change order. That change order would be a negotiated change order, not a bidded change order. So I believe that there is risk in doing that. Also, I believe that a contractor would expect an award of a contract if we go out to bid. There is risk in that because we don't know if the bid prices will come in on a project that we don't have funding for any project currently right now. We have to have funding in place to have a legitimate process that a contractor can bid on. They want to be paid for their work.
So it seems like a chicken egg thing to me, and I wonder how do we have funding if we don't know the price to which we need to fund? So the costs of the funding.
Typically, we base our rates, maximum rates, on cost estimates. When the project bid comes in, council imposes rates as needed to fund that project. That's easy for me to say. Nobody believes me behind me that council is going to keep the rates lower based on, or anybody's going to keep the rates lower. It seems like, we always just pass on the maximum rate. But that's how the process really gets implemented, is we can't take rates in more than what it costs us to provide that service. The city really has no desire to build up a huge fund of money for nothing really out there. It can be only used in this enterprise fund. We want to be able to operate the sewer enterprise fund to pay for the project and pay for those necessary improvements and operate the system. That's the funding that we are looking for. Rates will be based on estimates. The actual imposition of rates will be based on those costs. And council does not necessarily need to impose the maximum rate that is approved through a 218 process.
There was a comment made about a property tax assessment and funding the project through that. Can you comment on that versus the rate, a 218 process versus going directly through property tax?
As our rate consultants in their presentation, it's a method of collection. It's allowed through the Health and Safety Code. It's really outside my area of expertise, which is fairer to the community. I've seen both processes used. Los Osos, they're collecting it through the property taxes. I live in Atascadero. We collect our total sewer bill through property taxes. Not just the capital portion of it, but the entire bill, because they don't have a billing function there, because they're not a water company, so it's easier to do it through rates. So it is a method of collection that is used by many agencies, and I think it is a viable method of collection.
And the last comment that I had that somebody made, this is Ms. Beckman's comment, it has to do with the Coastal Commission meeting, and I think it's a fair question. I was in your office 2 days after the last council meeting discussing with you what the timeline might be with regard to meeting with Coastal. You'd already made a call, and we're trying to get a meeting set up. That occurred today. And so evidently a citizens group was able to meet with Coastal a week ago. Might you comment on that for the benefit of those that raised the question?
We worked with their coastal staff. This is as soon as they could get. We wanted to make sure that we had their players in the room that could meet. The deputy director, we definitely wanted Dan Carl there. He had a limited schedule of when he could meet. He was out of the office a lot of last week, so he could not meet with us last week. And that was, Dan has experience with the former project. He will be one of the key advisors to the commission, and we wanted to make sure that we heard from Dan and he heard from us in that meeting. So
getting the key people in the room was absolutely imperative.
It was imperative
because of the
to us.
relationships that you have, staff's developed with Coastal, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay.
And this meeting that we had this morning, their first suggestion was to hold it at 2:30 this afternoon. That would have made this us making back to this council meeting rather difficult. They were able to squeeze us in early in the morning, which actually I think worked out a little bit better, although it did mean getting on the road at 6:30 or 6 o'clock or something like that.
Thanks for bearing with me, and hopefully I didn't surprise you with any of the stuff we've all talked about. I know you and I have talked about it a number of times. So
yes.
Marlis?
Well, you've asked some of the questions that I had, but there's still one left that I'd like you to address, and that is why we're still talking about South Bay Boulevard. And it's my understanding that we are doing no more work on South Bay Boulevard. We're not expending any resources on that. Basically, we want to be able to compare the other sites we've asked you to compare to the South Bay site. Is that correct?
That is correct. There will be a minor amount of work because we're taking all of the peer review recommendations for any cost savings measures and applying those to the South Bay Boulevard site.
I see.
South Bay Boulevard site, from our perspective, is still the site that council has selected. We have not been directed to abandon that site yet because we wanted more information on the other sites. That is the reason it is still on the table.
Right, and the reason that the council asked you to get cost and feasibility information on the Giannini and Righetti sites is because they were the other top-ranked sites. Correct. Right. So what we're trying to do is get comparative data on a variety of possible sites because we really don't know what Coastal Commission is going to do at this point.
Correct.
Thank you.
Matt? Red?
Rob, I want to dig a little deeper into the Toro Creek site. I did a distance comparison today, and the distance from, just say Hanson, out to the Cayucas site on Toro Creek Road is 3.7 miles, and the distance from Hanson to our South Bay site is about 3.3 miles. So that seems pretty comparable as far as site is concerned. And Cayucas paid about $12,000 an acre for the property that they purchased, which is pretty close to what we have a commitment for at South Bay. So considering that we don't have to climb any hills to get to Toro Creek Road, it seems on the surface that is a better site than South Bay. So why aren't we investigating that, I guess, is the question.
From what I recall in my investigation of weekly investigation of that site, there may be a bit of a hill, a slight rise to get there. So it's not a gravity flow to get to that site. I think the pipeline is about the same, maybe a little bit longer. The costs are going to be relatively the same at that site for pumping and force main, for pump station and force main. Perhaps the energy costs over time would be less. There might be a little bit less of elevation. We're still pumping back. You have to still make it up the Morro Bay bump there to get back. For groundwater recharge. There really is no water supply benefit to the city of Morro Bay in the Toro Creek Valley there.
But from either site, we have to pump back.
We'd have to pump back, yes.
Yeah.
I think they're probably cost comparative, the South Bay site and the Toro Creek site.
Okay.
At this level of analysis in this room, I'd say they're pretty close.
Okay. But Toro Creek is not demonstrably preferable.
No, I think from no, I'll leave it at that. I think if we were going through this process perhaps again and we had made it as far as we did and we picked Toro instead of South Bay Boulevard, I think we'd be back at this same point with a very expensive project and looking back at the existing site.
Okay. That's all. Thanks.
First of all, thanks for making the trip up there and back this morning safely. I know you guys got up early, and I know we're still here late, so we put in a long day. So I just want to say thanks for making the trip. And as far as going out to bid and being somewhat at risk, in your opinion, doing that right now, if we were to go out to bid and based on some of our comments, we're saying, oh, okay, the Hanson site, that should be the obvious preferred site. But we've just had one conversation with Coastal, and by saying, oh, let's just go out to bid for that, we don't have a project to really take to Coastal to have some more feedback on the viability of it being permittable. That's still an obstacle, is it not?
I think it's a big obstacle.
So we can jump on go out to bid, and whether or not it's multiple sites, we still have to come back and get a determination. And where do you balance the expense and risk of that in the process, the most efficient, expeditious process to get there, both getting a good number and having Coastal Commission supportive and not investing time and money and not knowing we're going to get there, or just going back and having to apply and go before the commission and take that chance. I mean, we had a determination from Coastal staff prior to our last project, before even going to Coastal Commission. I would think we would want to have a positive determination, not a negative determination, before doing that. That's my guess. Any response or suggestions on that?
I think it's exactly what I related earlier. There's a lot of risk in going out to bid without having the environmental done and permits on a
So in a month, we'll have some estimates based on council direction on some analysis on potential sites, comparisons, right? So we'll have that. And the focus has been on that primarily, because that's what we left with at our last meeting. To continue the conversation with these site comparisons with Coastal Commission relies on, we still have to rely on Coastal staff availability. And my understanding is, that's going to be a process as well. So how are we going to be able to, in a month, come back with comparable prices and have any kind of conversation with Coastal Commission staff on the proposed sites that we're looking at? And did they give us any sense of this is what we're looking for if you're going at that site? There's some comment about the deed restriction on the power plant site. I can't tell you the deed restriction verbatim, but I wouldn't. It's industrial based. I wouldn't say that there would be anything that would prohibit a wastewater treatment plant or a water reclamation facility from being located on the power plant site. I say that with a question mark, but to my knowledge, that the deed restriction was related to industrial uses versus a hospital or anything like that. So I imagine that will be validated during this next phase, when we come back for the cost analysis that we've laid out. It's both a question and a request that we verify that. And I think we have all those documents in place to be able to get some analysis on that.
That is also my recollection, because that is the same deed restriction when we took possession of the Triangle parking lot site, that deed restriction, and they do talk about...
As an example, a boatyard can be located there on the Triangle parking lot.
But we couldn't put housing there.
Exactly. Okay. Can I... Okay, go ahead.
Rob, in terms of my understanding, in terms of the timeline that we're talking about right now, could we go to this understanding that on all the various sites that we're looking at, MBR is the preferred method of creation of a plant? Could we go to some sort of piecemeal bid process for a cookie cutter, quote unquote, MBR plant? And that way get the process started, understanding that the EIR for the existing sites are going to take time as we're dealing with coastal, but we know that we're going to be going down the road of MBR.
Yes, we can do that. There are risks because we award a contract based on just this cookie cutter MBR. There are other components to the project than just the treatment processes itself. There's all the site work that's going to be involved, the piping that's going to be involved.
I guess the reason I bring that up in terms of that piecemeal commentary is we can get started on one piece. Understanding the other parts of the project, yes, I understand that those other parts will come into play as we're going through this, but we could start that process.
We could, but I would not recommend based on the risk involved, because then we're negotiating prices for all those other items rather than getting contractor competition and bids on them. I've worked with enough contractors on public projects that look for change orders basically that's where the profit is involved, is in the change order process.
Okay. So we're going to come back in a month and we'll have our cost estimates. Is there the other thing? Subcommittee. I know we've already the staff already met with Coastal Commission. I guess part of my conversation is to what degree the council wants to discuss the subcommittee involvement. As an update, Marlos and I are on the subcommittee. As far as next meetings with Coastal Commission between staff and subcommittee members in that involvement, kind of next steps. I guess that's a question for both council and how we want to address those things, and kind of next steps as far as that's, as I understand it, to be determined on when we go to see Coastal Commission staff again, and with what degree of information are we going to have? And I guess that's, will we be better prepared at our next meeting when we have cost assessments of what a game plan would be to go see Coastal, and have maybe some refined ideas on where we can get some productive information and feedback on moving forward with the site. Would that be, elaborate on that?
And the other piece of information that we'll have next meeting is looking at the findings for denial on the previous project, relating them to the new proposed site and how we would mitigate for those denial findings. I think that's very important for them, and we talked about putting this matrix together to walk them through how that would be accomplished. Coastal hazards, sea level rise. How are you going to address that with this particular location? Flooding, coastal flooding hazards. How will you address that with this new project? We need to be able to walk them through all those findings to get them comfortable with that, because I think at the end of the day, ideally, we want, if we're proceeding forward, we want to move forward with their staff with a favorable recommendation rather than a recommendation for denial. And because, quite frankly, one of the options is to move forward no matter what Coastal says and to make it a battle.
We have no idea what the end result would be.
Exactly. So, whereas if we move forward with their staff recommending approval, I think we have a much greater chance to have success.
So, unless there's further questions, I know we could probably wrap things up, but can you elaborate a little bit more on, no, you know what, I won't even ask that. I think I'm comfortable with where we're at.
I just need to ask one quick follow-up just based on this interchange. When you said we would be going to Coastal with the preferred site, wouldn't we want to involve them in that site selection process in some way?
Oh, yeah. When I said going to Coastal with a preferred site, I mean when we ultimately go to the commission at through the hearings process.
I see.
We will involve their staff all the way along. We're not going to do it in a box and drop that on their desks and say, here you go.
No, so we will not make a decision here at the council level unless you have already vetted some of the alternative sites with Coastal Commission and shown how each one of them might be mitigated to meet their objections.
Yes, and I think, in my opinion, like I talked earlier, we're not going to try to vet a unlimited number of sites.
No.
We're going to pick one and move forward with it, because I think one will shine as opposed to the others. Yes. Okay.
All right.
I just want to add one thing to this coastal meeting discussion that we had today. Obviously, I'm not the technical person, so what I emphasize the coastal is that cost is making the council and its community go back, and how much agonizing has gone into this decision, how many sites have been visited over the last 4 years, how we've narrowed it down, how we had endless discussions. I missed most of that, thank God, but I've been here the last year and a half and have watched a lot of it occur. And what Coastal came back with, and I think having Dan Carl there was very important, and that's why the meeting waited until this week to function, to happen. But one of the things that Coastal came back with is community support for the decision the council makes is going to be important to them. It's not going to be an easy hill to climb to get them to give us a permit to go back west of 1 without that community support, because they remind us that community lack of support is what led to the denial. There were community members that appealed the decision. And so they made it very clear cost is a big factor in this decision, and they realize that. And it is important in their thinking as well, but community support being part of that.
Okay, thanks, Marty. So basically, this was an update, receive and file, an opportunity to give any course correction direction that we thought we might need to. I think we've discussed, all of our questions and points. So thanks very much, and thanks for everybody. I just will respond. So also a request not to move the agenda around. I heard that. We'll be more cognizant of that next time. And the other comment to that, if we do the marijuana workshop or study session, we'll have it pretty well dialed in to where one is back to back and we won't be moving things around. So I heard those comments, and we'll make sure we address that at the next one. With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda is C2. And so this is the Water Reclamation Facility fiscal year quarter budget update. And we looking at this for Craig?
Another team effort.
Thanks. So I know there are some questions on the budget side of things, and I know some folks are leaving, and I was hoping that we could address some of those before people left.
All right, thank you. Craig Smallinger with the Finance Department. So, again, as Rob mentioned, this is a team effort, writing the staff report and presenting the financial data that's before you in item C2. So before you is an update on the WRF financials, and this is for the third quarter of fiscal year 2016-17. So that period covers January 1st, 2017 through March 31st, 2017. What these reports also include are the fiscal year-to-date figures for fiscal year 16-17 as well. So July 1, 2016 through March 31st, 2017. Thanks, Scott. That's not coming through very well, but we'll get it. What they also include are the project life-to-date figures from 2013 forward. So this report has been delayed a little bit, and that's due to some other WRF priorities kind of taking precedent over putting this financial report together. The notable priority during this time was the peer review process and the associated kind of follow-up work to that peer review process. This report was also put together, your financial reports, on agenda packet pages 118 and 119 as a collaborative effort between city staff, Mike Nunley and Associates, which is as you know, the city's project management team for the WRF project, and the WRF-CAC Finance Subcommittee. All agreed on this format, and that's why you see it before you in this format. So agenda packet page 116 provides a key with the object names and descriptions that indicate the actual financial reports on agenda pages 118 and 119. So you'll see a kind of a little matrix with key that it kind of explains what these descriptors mean and kind of gives you a breakdown of what those costs entail. And again, those are keys that represent pages 118 and 119. So what are we seeing from these third quarter financial reports? The third quarter and year-to-date figures, again, year-to-date for fiscal year 16-17 through the third quarter, show that expenditures are much lower than you would expect at the third quarter for that budget period. So for that third quarter period, we only expended 54% of what we expected for expenditures, and year-to-date it was only at 17% of what you'd expect over that period. And just a quick note as we're looking, don't look at what's on the screen right now. Don't look at that. That's a future reference. I apologize. I wish I could have a clicker to make it go black right now. That's just in a minute. So again, those third quarter and year-to-date expenditure figures are quite a bit lower than you would expect at the third quarter of a fiscal year, which you would assume roughly 75% expended if you use straight line accounting. And those low expenditure figures are to be expected because there were some delays in the project that weren't forecast when we put together the budget for fiscal year 16-17. So if you look on agenda packet, page 119, specifically the expenditures to date, you'll see the figure of $3.230 million. I wish I would have had each of these on a slide up there. I apologize, it's a little difficult to walk through right now. So again, page 119 is the second gold column on the top section, has the total of $3.23 million, and that's the total expended on the WRF project from inception, which is 2013 through the third quarter of fiscal year 16-17, so March 31st of 2017. So an important note, now we can look at the overhead figure up there. What you're looking at here is the new CIP worksheets, so capital improvement program worksheets that staff put together to enhance financial reporting on what we do for every CIP that we have in the budget now. So it's a little hard to see, but in the upper left, that second number up there reads $3.387 million, which is remarkably close to the $3.23 million figure that we've got through this financial report. So those two things are kind of talking when we put together the budget for fiscal year 17-18 up there. So just wanted to point that number out. So going on to the next page in your agenda packet, page 120 shows the city's WRF consultant contract summary. Most notably, if you look at the column roughly in the middle of that page titled Draw Request, you'll see the total figure for the consultant draw request of $2.374 million. And again, this is life to date of these consultant contracts. This isn't just over this third quarter fiscal year 16-17 reporting period. So that's life to date, and that matches up with the previous page when looking at the current consultants line item on page 119. Going further, we've also provided a summary sheet based on some requests from the council and our community members as well, and it looks like a colored pie chart up here. So this top section shows the breakdown of the fiscal year 16-17 average residential sewer rates. So that top section shows as a percentage where the rate study said we would parse out each dollar that we got in from residential sewer rates. So as a percentage, the blue box up there, or the blue pie, excuse me, represents 29% of that rate increase that was implemented in 2015 for last fiscal year would go towards funding for the WRF or the reserves. And then you have the other sections as well. So there's the yellow section titled Collection Systems, which is 30% of that figure. Current wastewater treatment. So at the current wastewater treatment plan is 29%, and then 12% for other capital improvement program expenditures. And then down below you have that same chart but in dollar figures. So that's $62.50, the average residential rate. $18.12 goes to funding for the WRF and reserves. $18.65 for the collection system, $18.42 for the wastewater treatment, and $7.31 for other non-WRF related CIP cost. And then if you flip that page over, there's been some interest in what our sewer and water accumulation fund balance have looked like. How much money do we actually have in the bank? So there were some rate increases implemented in 2015 after a long period of not implementing those rate increases. So what staff did is put together these charts, and you'll see the middle column for each of these charts for either the sewer accumulation fund or the water accumulation fund has a little asterisk denoting that these are the first full year of those 2015 rate increases. So you see the bottom section of either of those showing the source of, or in parentheses, use of fund balance. So if it's a source of without parentheses, that's a good thing. That means fund balance is going up. We can pay for capital improvement programs, including a new WRF going forward. So you'll see the sewer accumulation fund kind of gaining ground for 15-16 at $2.1 million. Again, 16-17 at just under $2 million. And then 17-18, we've actually budgeted a little bit of use of that fund balance, assuming we're going to move forward at a pretty good clip on the WRF project. And then again, down below, there's the sewer rate revenue chart on that same page 122. And that bottom section again, as the asterisk indicates for fiscal year 15-16, the first full year of implementing the new sewer rates, you'll see the amounts over and above what the old rates would have been. So 15-16, that amount is just under $700,000 increase over the previous year as the direct result of those rate increases. Following year, 1.339, and what we have budgeted for 17-18 at 1.9. So the total cumulative impact we can see as far as rates above and beyond what we had with our old rates as a result of implementing these new 2015 rates, we can expect at the end of this year would be $4 million. So we've heard some comments that we should have been able to pay for, say, a $70 million WRF at this point. That was never the intent, according to the rate study. That would have taken roughly 30 years to get to that level of funding. So this chart is just supposed to be a graphic representation of how much additional funding we've got to date. I hope that made sense. We talked through a lot of numbers on a lot of pages really quickly, and I know I'm talking quickly because we got about 10:20 and hoping to get moving on it. And I was hoping to turn this over to Mr. Mike Nunley, who can go over the consultant contract page that I just briefly hit at page 120.
Thank you, Craig. I'll direct you to the consultant contract summary that we put together that is our page 3 and is your page 120. And there's a companion...
Excuse me, Mike. I know I see people in the audience with some of the similar papers, and we do have this in the back. Is that correct? I know some people have it in the audience. Good.
So yes,
thanks.
I printed out some larger copies because the copies in the pack are really small, so I want to make sure they were out there.
And I also brought a companion document that's on an 11 by 17. There's some copies in the back. I handed some copies out to council as well. And these, the first that's in your packet gives a detailed update of the each of the consultant contracts under the WRF. As you can see, we've numbered them, 1 through 17. And this is the system, this is the numbering that Procore assigns to these contracts as they come in. And so we track all these through that Procore project management software. And the information we track through that, we have the total contract amount, we have the approved change orders, so that's any change orders that come up that have been approved by either by Rob within his authority or by council. The total with approved change orders, that column is adding total plus the approved change orders. Draw requests. So draw request is kind of an interesting term. If you're not familiar with it, it means it applies to invoices that have been submitted from consultants but have not yet been paid, or may have been paid, or have been paid or haven't been paid. So it's the total amount of invoices that have been submitted. That always tracks a little bit ahead of total payments, because it can take a while to review those, for city to approve them, and to release payment. And then total remaining is the total minus the total approved with change orders minus the total payments. And then we also have two other columns there: the percent paid and percent complete. And the difference between those, many of these contracts are time and materials contracts. Every contract has a defined scope, a defined budget, a defined schedule, and defined deliverables. and they're all managed very closely. And in many cases, there's an advantage to having a time and materials contract with these consultants, because if you look, sometimes we're 100% complete and we're only 80% paid. So there's an advantage when you have somewhat of a nebulous work scope, or you have a work scope that could adapt or could be done less expensively, to do that under a time and materials contract for some type of consultants, because you can actually save some money, because they might finish early if you can assist them and support their work. And then we have the pending change orders. That gives any change order requests have been submitted that have not yet been approved, and then the name of the vendor. Now, this companion 11 by 17 we produced summarizes some of that other information, but the key items over on the right, one of the questions that had come in today was, what's a brief description of the scope of work for these consultants? What have all these folks done? And so we've given just a one-line brief description of who these folks are and what their effort and what their focus has been. And so I won't read through all those, but we're going to make sure this is also posted on the website, and this has been provided to the public as well. A couple of some milestones that were accomplished this quarter. We started the WIFIA application, pretty thick document, required a lot of technical information, financial information, and that was work with Kestrel Consulting and our firm. Meetings with State Water Board to talk about funding. In Sacramento, we went and attended with the city manager. Development of the Master Water Reclamation Plan, that happened. A lot of that work happened within that quarter. Some of the work for biology and cultural resources also occurred during that quarter. The hydrogeology and the modeling, a lot of that was done, significantly wrapped up through that quarter. And that included the work by GSI Water to evaluate the feasibility of groundwater injection in Morrow Valley, and then also to wrap up some evaluation of recycled water alternatives in the Choro and Morrow Valley from a broader perspective. And then also beginning the rate study and the flow monitoring contracts were authorized. You'll see those were two line items that were added. They're SC 16 and 17. If you look at the last quarterly report, those two contracts were added, but no time had been charged against those yet in that quarter. So that's why they're zeroed out, but you'll see the total contract amount's $141,800. A couple of questions that came through from one of the WRFCAC members that I did want to share with you were a request on some clarification compared to comparing the third quarter expenditures to second quarter. And one note was that the fiscal year-to-date total expenditures appeared to be overstated by $972 when adding the second quarter year-to-date to the third quarter expenditures. Now, this is not on the consultant contract anymore. This is going back to the main fiscal reports. And those deltas were because the city does not close out their accounting for the quarter. Basically what happens is sometimes these expenses will come in after the end of the quarter, and they wind up showing up. There were some second quarter expenses of $900 that came through in third quarter, and so we added those back into the year to date prior to the third quarter. So that explains the discrepancy. And then the other question was about the fact that the consultant contract summary report between third quarter and second quarter had differed with the total contract amount by $141,800. That's because these two new contracts were added, so that the total contract amount increased by $141,800. And those were the two I just mentioned that we talked about. But I did want to bring that up because those were good questions from WRFCAC in case anybody else had similar questions.
Thanks. Any questions for Mike? Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Mike, for that. Appreciate it. And thank you, Craig. By the way, I love that one, too. I've got the old iteration of that as well. A Could you explain why, for the audience, maybe a number of people have asked me, why we're only reporting through the third quarter? In other words, we're about a quarter and a half behind.
So, a couple things I can point to. So we're providing technical support now to the city to help put the budget reports together. But as you recall, the financial report preparation is not within our scope of work anymore. Our ability to provide support on that, when we went on the pause, on everything. And so that was something we discussed with city staff. So these reports are now being produced for that quarter. It typically does take us, we've talked about this before, it does take a couple of months to have good financial reports for a quarter after that quarter ends, because we have these consultants like Black & Veatch is a good example, or ESA. They might have a number of sub-consultants, and sometimes they have to wait. When the month closes for them, they'll have to wait a couple of weeks to get their sub-consultant invoices. Then they have to prepare their own invoices and get them to us. And then sometimes there's some back and forth on those. There's some questions, there's some clarification needed. Typically, we really haven't seen any, I would say, errors, but there have been times when an expense was not reported appropriately, and we asked for more information on those. So there's a little bit of lag there to make that number more accurate for the quarter.
And if I could jump in real quick on that as well, the city does go through an approval process in the Procore system as well. So even with those kind of trailing invoices that come through and then go through the routing internally in there, those will be reviewed, make sure that they're appropriate per the contract that's been let and approved. And that'll be done by finance staff prior to going over to Mr. Livick to make sure all the engineering standards and all that go forward. So there is a little bit of time to make sure those financials are accurate.
Thank you. And the only other question I had, there's no Procore payment noted in the third quarter report. Is that an annual payment that comes?
Yes,
Is that why that's not showing up yet?
Once a year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Marlis.
Okay, sure. And thank you for enlarging this for me. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody does, so we can read it. Just a couple questions. Can you tell me, there's a statement in the report that suggests that incoming revenue is not directed into a specific fund for the WRF, and could you tell me why that is?
So if you recall, when we were looking to close the books actually on fiscal year 15-16, going back quite a ways to when I was just first starting with the city, we worked with our auditors when the funding for the WRF project was actually collected in the current wastewater treatment plant fund. And by wastewater treatment plant fund, I mean the joint venture between the city and Cayucas. I'll use the number, it's Fund 599, just to make it easy to react to that. What the auditors wanted us to do is extract the budget and expenditures from that 599, now that that was not going to be a joint venture, and separate that out into another fund. So we brought that before council through the audit process as well, and informed that we'd be moving out those budgeted revenues and expenditures over to, it's called the 321 fund, which is the sewer operations fund, which is the fund where I listed the accumulated fund balance. I know this is all accounting, high nerd stuff, but so it's in the sewer operations fund. What we also mentioned was it has its own department in there, which is the 8312. I remember having a long conversation about the 8312. It's specific to the WRF project. So it is cleanly accounted for in that department, but no, it isn't in a separate fund.
But you're keeping track of exactly how much revenue is being used on this project.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's actually a really good point, because predominantly we have utilized sewer rate revenue to fund it at this point, which is a good thing. Instead of drawing down the approved SRF loan that we have for $10.375 million and accumulating interest on that, we are able to use that sewer rate revenue fund. So yes, we are accounting for that.
Okay. And I am correct in reading these charts that on the top page of, I believe it's 119, you have project expenditures to date. Is that right? Am I reading it right?
That's correct. So that would be from 2013 kind of forward, when we went away from the initial site and then kind of moved out and looked elsewhere.
And that was my next question. What do we count as the project start date? So before that time, when the city was working on a different site and a different project, were they keeping track of expenditures? Maybe that's not a fair question to put to you, but maybe Rob can answer it.
Yes.
Yes.
We had a different project number that we tracked those, and in the 14-15 audit for the, I don't have that paper with me, but Craig does, we can give you the total amount that was basically written off at that time from that old project.
Yes, so we do have that number. To Rob's point, we talked about this quite a bit, and there was an audit finding that basically compiled everything we'd expended on the project, and when there was a determination to move away from that site, it was shown as a negative kind of financial loss, essentially, to construction in progress is what they call it. So that figure is $2.35 million, or $2.235 million, excuse me.
Thank you. So we obviously know how much this project has cost us from the very, very, very beginning until this point.
Well, I should put a caveat on that, because at that time, Cayucas was paying a share of that as well. So that isn't 100% city bill.
Okay.
A portion thereof would have been Cayucas footing the portion of the planning phases and things like that.
Right. Thank you. So that really answers my question of whether or not you could provide an estimate of prior funds expended. You've already said you could. And we've already talked about the WIFIA loan and the possible interest rate on that. So thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Marlis. Matt?
Yes. Okay, Craig, thanks. In terms of one of the earlier comments tonight was that we had no ombudsmen who are keeping track of all of this, but clearly we are. And so in terms of the presentation of this items, because looking through all these pieces of paper and whatnot, they can be somewhat overwhelming. And I know you might have been considering, especially in the last few days, some sort of mannerism or way of presenting these facts. Is that still kind of a work in progress? Or because as you're explaining it right now, I'm like, okay, this is I'm getting this. And I do believe you're covering a lot of different bases and concerns that people have. But in terms of the presentation, have you come up with any ideas?
So probably my third statement in this presentation was how we got to this place in financial reporting. So this was a task undertaken by Mr. Nunley and his staff, along with the WRF-CAC subcommittee for finance, as well as city staff. So this is the format that was agreed upon that would give a level of detail so you knew what was going on beyond just consultant contracts. If it was the desire of the council for us to pursue a different reporting mechanism, we can certainly do that. I do have some ideas to help make that an easier process and potentially make our reporting align directly with an output out of the city's financial system. So that's going to take quite a bit of work. I don't want to undermine that. What I mentioned a few minutes ago was having an audit requirement to basically extract the revenues and expenditures out of one fund, move to another. At certain times, these costs lived in a couple of different funds or project numbers that we would need to reconcile, which we have done offline, but we can utilize the existing city financial system. Once we reconcile those, say, through the end of fiscal year 16-17, then it's a clean report from there forward. All we do is extract, copy, paste, use Mr. Nunley's or the city's financial system, Procore, to extract the encumbrances, things like that. And I think it would be a cleaner document going forward.
Okay, understanding that. Okay, that sounds wonderful if we can pull that off. But then meanwhile, these forms and whatnot will be available on the wharf site on the city website, correct? So then when people want that more in-depth picture, they can access that. Will they be clearly delineated in terms of this is X, this is Y, this is Z?
We have a separate directory under the WRF website for budget reports. So we'll put it there, and we'll make sure we clearly label what these items are.
So if I can jump in, I'd be remiss not to mention, has been mentioned a few times tonight, Friday will be my last day with the city. We will have an interim finance director coming on, most likely tomorrow. Anytime you kind of have someone new coming on and someone leaving, there can be a little gap with getting someone up to speed. So it may take a little bit of time, and that's kind of why I mentioned maybe with the closing of fiscal year 16-17 would be a good time to get that person up to speed. And I'm not leaving. I still have my phone leash on me, and I'm volunteering to assist with that process as well. Just wanted to mention that.
Brad?
I have no questions.
Okay. I'm just going to open. Thanks. I'm going to open it for public comment since we got through this. Thanks for all the reporting. Appreciate that. Carol Truesdale, and then Jeff Heller, and then David Nelson. I don't see Jeff, so David, you'll be next. Thanks, Carol.
Oh, thank you. Boy, guys, it's a long night. Anyway, I'm reading the letter. All of you have a copy here. It's addressed to the Honorable Mayor, Council, and staff. Regarding, I'm Carol Truesdale and have lived in North Morro Bay since 1995. And for the record, I'm very concerned about a couple of items in the staff report generated by Rob Levick, Public Works Director, specifically page 117 of 235, starting with paragraph 2, in quotes. User rates fund the city sewers enterprise, including efforts not related to the new WRF, such as collections and treatment costs at the current sewer rate treatment plant. Incoming revenue is not directed into a specific fund for the WRF, close paren, open paren, or quotation. User rates would repay the loans in accordance with financing terms and conditions, which can vary depending upon the program. Close. Whatever I can't even think at this time. In addition, paragraph 3, the city increased sewer rates in 2015 in anticipation of the WRF project, along with other capital needs within the current sewer system, but these are not directed into a specific fund for the WRF. Since a loan was approved in January 2017, WRF expenditures have been paid from sewer revenue reserves. My question is, will this money being used from the Prop 218 vote in 2015 be reimbursed to the WRF fund, and how? Next, page 122 of 235, item 2, fund balance figures and accumulations since 2015 Proposition 218 vote, paragraph stating with, worth noting is the current approved sewer rate and future year approved sewer rates were never intended to build a $75 million sewer treatment plant, as the CSD was still a viable partner to play roughly 25% or $19 million of the project cost. Additionally, current rates would not have recouped the $56 million in funding needed to pay Morro Bay's share of the project for roughly 30 years. I'm perplexed as it pertains to the information that was originally disseminated to the public in the notice of public hearing on proposed water and sewer rate increases dated May 26, 2015 on page 4. Sewer rates, new $75 million wastewater treatment plant, and high priority sewer system infrastructure needs, for which the property owner voted for the passage of Prop 218, stated one thing, and yet in this August 8, 2017 staff report, comments are totally different. And for your convenience, I've attached a copy. I voted for the passage of Prop 218 based on that information that was disseminated in 2015 to the citizens because I thought it was correct and the city was marching in a positive direction. And now we're told in writing that that was never the intent. I personally feel duped as the tax-paying member of this community, and my trust in city staff and leaders have really diminished substantially. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. David Nelson.
I'll be short here. David Nelson, this is all out of control. I mean, millions of more dollars gone, and we really don't have anything to show for it. And I'm really, really sad as a ratepayer that our rates are going through the roof for consulting that just really is going to go to waste. It's like having a big refrigerator full of food and what we've been doing and got nowhere to put it. And nobody's going to eat it except us as the ratepayers. and this is just wrong. This is just the wrong way to do this. And we said that to the last council that went through this, and here we are back at the original site again. You guys are blowing it.
And I don't have Jeff Heller here, so that I don't. Anybody else for public comment? Come on up, Terry.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't realize that there were two different items. I did look at the...
Make sure you got that mic down there, please. Thank you. I've got to do it myself and make sure we're in there.
I've got two different things going on here. I'm looking at the city's report on page 120. It's actually the consultant's spreadsheet.
Make sure you're in the mic there, Terry.
The consultant's spreadsheet of 120 of the staff report. A couple of items. I'd never seen anything like this before on this project, and I was aghast for the first few moments when I looked at it. As Rob Livick pointed out earlier, contractors love to do change orders because that's where the profit is. And the first thing that jumped out to me was the program management original total was $920,000, but yet they got a $1,250,000 change order. That speaks to profit right there. And that's MKN and Associates. I'd like to see the work product that the $813,000 has been paid for. All I've seen in work product from them is a few slides and posters. I know they did a lot of stuff, I'm sure about that, but it'd be nice to know what the work product was. But the one that really jumped out at me was the $710,000 facilities master plan, of which $623,000 has been paid to Black and Veatch. That, I'm guessing, is the facilities master plan at the Tri-W site. Are we going to write that off if we relocate, or will any of the work done to do a master plan site on one site be of any value if we come back to closer to the plant? The numbers are large. I used to be in this business where the numbers were large. They're not shockingly large, but it is interesting to see how we've kind of gone in a few missteps and gone some funny directions. I still have a positive feeling about this. We can do it, but let's add a person in Rob's staff to ride herd on the consultants from a local basis, and let's hire some local consultants that aren't being paid thousands of dollars to drive up from Southern California to have meetings. I don't know. Good luck with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. With that, I'll close public comment, and can you respond to a couple of those? Sure. And I think the other one, as far as the change order and the draw requests, you could probably speak to that, Craig.
So I'll take on the Black and Veatch facilities master plan. Much of the facilities master plan is portable. It's only the site work itself that is specific to the site. So all the process work that was involved, all the treatment technology is transferable. Of course, we will have to amend a facilities master plan or provide an addendum or cover it in the environmental document for the new, wherever this site is. We will need to address that at some point, whether it's done through a facilities master plan update or through the environmental document. We still will have to do that. The change order for MKN is probably a bad way to characterize that, because we issued a contract for MKN for several years. 5 years, I believe, is your contract. We knew that we would be coming back to council each year and authorizing a new year's worth of contract expenditures. So first year, 900, second year, 1.248 million. I don't think we're going to get to that amount. I say unfortunately, because if we were spending close to that, we would be moving the project forward.
I think it's also worth mentioning on that specific contract change order that there was a special council open to the public noticed workshop that went on for roughly 2 hours to discuss all the nuances of that as well. And that occurred in February, roughly?
Yes.
How can we forget? Okay. Thanks. Okay, any other questions or comments from council? John?
Could you address Ms. Truesdale's questions in her letter?
I don't have her letter per se, but I heard what she
possibly.
said.
Yeah, okay. You want it? Maybe.
I think I can address a couple of those that I noted. She was going through them pretty quickly, and I don't have a copy. But
you want a copy?
Kind of going back to her note about page 122 in the agenda report about feeling duped with the Prop 218 vote that happened in 2015. So that vote took place prior to me being here, so I did quite a bit of research prior to putting together this form and pulled the exact language and the exact dollar figures that were included in that package that went forward before council and was included in the notice. There was another note.
So can you explain what was in the notice again, please? What part was in the notice?
There was the notice, and the actual rate study was included that showed how much Cayucas was intended to pay for the wastewater treatment plant and how much the city of Morro Bay would be paying for that. So that's where we have these noted figures here on page 122 again, in that middle paragraph that reads, were never intended to build a $75 million sewer treatment plant, as the CSD was still a viable partner to pay roughly 25% or $19 million of the project cost. Additionally, current rates would not have recouped the $56 million, which was the Morro Bay's share of the project as forecasted in those rates and published in that 218 notice. So what was included in the notice was language that closely mirrors this with these numbers directly out of that rate study.
Yeah, could I add to that just a bit, because I was serving on PWAB at the time we passed that rate increase, and as I recall, the rate increase itself, we were planning on getting a loan, and so the rate increase was to pay back on that loan for the 5 years that the rates were in effect. So that's what that rate increase covered. Is that correct, Rob? That's my recollection.
Yes, the project was going to be, the project would be built through a loan funding, and the rate increase would pay that back.
Right.
Similar to what we're...
Exactly. But that would be over like 30 years. And so this was only the first 5 years that we were...
I think if you look at Craig's spreadsheet, it shows we don't have, let alone $75 million in the wastewater fund bank, we don't have the $56 million yet, because that was going to come over the next 30 years.
Right.
We can't expect the community to fund a $56 million project in 5 years.
Right.
It would be impossible.
Thank you.
And one of the other mentions that Ms. Truesdale had was on page 117, actually the staff report, which is paragraph 2, or full paragraph 2, when she talks about the reference in the staff report to not having a separate fund for the WRF, and I think we already went over that. There is not a separate fund. There's a separate department. We have a capital improvement project that will now track that going forward with detailed financial reporting as well.
Okay, everybody good to my right, to my left? Any other comments? Thanks for putting all this together. Appreciate it. And hopefully this will be repeated, so the information and from the report is there, and then on the website we'll be able to access some of that. Appreciate it. Thanks. Moving on to our next item. Our next item on the agenda, we have C4 and we have C5. So we have 2 items. We're coming up to 11 o'clock. and we'd need a motion to go beyond 11 o'clock. So I'll just ask right now if there's an appetite to go beyond 11 o'clock to discuss the Trident Wind resolution and resolution for policies and procedures. And I just want to get some conversation on whether or not we want to go any further. Okay.
Well, I believe that we have people here who have sat through the entire meeting, and I would make a motion that we at least hear the Trident Wind proposal.
I would concur, being that item number C5, I can see we could put off, but however,
Right.
Given that we've had folks here and
Right. They've been sitting here for a long time.
and sometimes we do, and usually I'm not in concurrence to go past 11, but if we could say
I
11,
move we
10,
go
11,
past
15.
to 11 to hear just the Trident Wind item.
So we have a motion. And we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Could we have time certain for ending, please, in the motion?
Just this item.
Not in the motion.
Okay, I will amend the motion to say we will till 11:15.
So we have a motion and a second. Marlis and then Matt is the second. Any further discussion? None. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. Did I get a 4-1? 4-1. Okay, 4-1. Yes, 4-1. Okay, thank you. So item C4. Okay, Craig?
All right, you're stuck with me again, one last time. Okay, so Craig Smolinger again from Finance Department. So a little bit of history. Trident Winds LLC approached the city to explore the possibility of cooperating between the city and Trident on the potential for permitting for a wind farm project off the coast of Morro Bay. Council and staff saw the equity in that, so Council authorized staff to work with Trident in October 2015 by way of a memorandum of cooperation, which is attachment 2 to the staff report. Specifically, the memorandum of cooperation included language for the city to, quote, consider supporting Trident's plan of permitting with respect to the federal, state, and local permits it will need to construct an offshore wind project. So with that spirit, city staff and Trident have been working together since October 2015, so the past almost 2 years, and have drafted the attached, which is attachment 1, community benefits agreement that will assist Trident with additional points through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, otherwise known as BOEM, bidding process for exclusive site control for a wind farm project off the coast of Morro Bay. So with the attached community, that's kind of the highlight of the noted benefits to Trident. The city wouldn't be giving away outfall rights or anything else with this community benefit agreement. Council authorized going forward and being a good partner with Trident because they've done some great things with outreach with our community, meeting with our Fisher group, providing community outreach meeting even up in Cambria a few months ago, things like that. So the logical question is, what is the city going to get for this? Because we should be getting something for entering into this agreement and assisting Trident. In our opinion, it looks pretty one-sided. I think we're getting quite a bit for it without really giving anything except for our lending our support to them through that BOEM bidding process, getting them some additional points through that process. So what we would be getting through this draft community benefits agreement is the promoting of local hiring of city residents throughout the project timeline. So that would include, permitting, planning, maintenance, all those type of things. Hiring and retaining local fisheries for various specific work projects. Obviously, that would be a process where Trident would work with most likely a HAB, harbor director over there, with finding skilled fishery groups that have the skill set that can do some of this work. Future funding for job training activities. So maybe we have some local folks here that could do a lot of this work and would be willing to do some of this work through planning or analysis or maintenance or even site administration, things like that. They could provide some funding or some direct support in training for those type of activities. Would also include measurable goals and or plans to increase tourism-related business benefits, so benefits to our local tourist-related business here. Community public meetings and input on the proposed project, which they already kind of are doing. This would just formalize them continuing to work closely with our community and city staff. And also formalizing an agreement with the local fishermen organizations and looking at potential negative impacts down the line and ways to mitigate that so our local fisheries and commercial fishery businesses aren't negatively or adversely impacted by a wind farm project. So that's kind of a high-level overview and quick background, and I'd like to turn it over to Alla Weinstein, who is the founder of Trident Winds LLC, to provide some supplemental information.
Mr. Mayor, council
Can
members.
you pull that mic down, please, Alla? Thank you.
No, I can see you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for having us here. Thank you for giving us time and staying as late as you are staying. Yes, we have been working on a project for quite a while. You may remember that we came or showed up really here in about July of 2015 to propose an offshore wind farm. Until that time, nobody in California was really thinking about offshore wind because of the technological challenges that the water depth presents here. Since that time, I am pleased to see that the notion of offshore wind in the state of California has been increased tremendously. And to the fact that in April of 2016, Governor Brown requested formation of the Intergovernmental Task Force between federal government and state government to promote offshore wind to define wind energy areas all off the coast of California. So the process that we initiated back in 2015 was an unsolicited lease request. We came, we did the analysis, worked with the stakeholders before we even submitted our unsolicited lease request. It took us about 9 months to identify all the areas. We worked with fishermen for quite a while, if you may remember. We held a public meeting in December of 2015, and even at that meeting, we said we're not ready to disclose the site until we have our discussions with fishermen. So it took all that time until January of 2016 when we did submit the unsolicited lease request post the public session, which we didn't really have to have. It just we chose to be good citizens and make sure that the stakeholders are aware of what we're doing. When we submitted the lease request, it took about 6 months for BOEM to go through its process. We got qualified and approved. The governor submitted the request for formation of task force. And then in August, exactly a year, actually, from now, BOEM put out the request for information and nomination. And Statoil Wind LLC, which is a subsidiary of the Norwegian state-owned oil company, submitted expression of interest on our site. That effectively put the process into a competitive mode. Effectively, whatever we did kind of got thrown out the window, and now the process is competitive. And it starts with identifying of wind energy areas, which is what the state is doing right now. The state, through the California Energy Commission, has created a data portal that collects all the environmental and conflicting uses of space data and information. And we were supposed to have a task force meeting on the 13th of July that got canceled because the state and the Bureau of Ocean Management has not yet received information from Department of Defense. As you know, the Central California has quite a significant activity of military activity as a part of Department of Defense, and that piece of information has not been provided because there is no Undersecretary of Defense. At the same time, we do hear that some of the areas specifically that are of interest to Statoil, which would be further south from where we are, kind of north of Vandenberg Air Force Base, but south of Diablo Canyon, would be smack in the middle of the military activities, and they may be an issue. So we're working through the DoD issues as we go along, but at the same time, we need to be prepared that things will move on and the project will happen. I think at this point, with the realization of the California Energy Commission, the CPUC, and the other state agencies of the benefits of offshore wind, it's a given the project will happen. Now the question is going to be which developer is going to develop. And we do recognize the fact that after spending 9 months doing a lot of research and work, we did pick a very good site. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't something that was done on the spur of the moment. And so that brings us to today. We did request the community benefits agreement as a first step, or the next step rather, in expanding our agreement on cooperation to now put it more in specific terms of what exactly we're going to do. That community benefits agreement provides a lot of benefits to the city. What do we get as a benefit? We get, as Craig said, a certain amount of credits during the auction. So the amount of credits is actually determined by BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Federal regulation gives a lot of discretion to BOEM on defining how many credits you're going to get for various benefit or for various agreements that you're going to bring to the table. So it's not known what you're going to get, but if I look at prior auctions on the East Coast, community benefits agreements estimated about 10% credit, power purchase agreement at about 25% credit, and nobody had a fisherman agreement, so that's unknown. But the point is very simple. There is no set requirement in the federal regulation what BOEM has to have or how much credit they're going to do. Once they get to the point of the sale notice, they will convene a 3-member panel of the BOEM employees, and those people will define the value of those agreements that a developer will bring to the table. You may recall our first discussion back in October, and I know some of the council members were not there, but I did bring an example of a project that was a failed project on the East Coast, and that's Cape Wind, that was shut down by community, by the stakeholders. Irrelevant which stakeholders, it was the stakeholders that killed the project. And what I wanted to achieve here was just the opposite, that it's the stakeholders that were wanting to have the project because it's a benefit to everyone. This is not going to cost the city anything. In fact, the city will be making revenue. Effectively, we would be replacing the generation that was done by the Morro Bay plant with an offshore wind farm. So it's a direct replacement in terms of energy generation, but it's also creation of a new industry that will require people and could utilize resources available in Morro Bay itself. Starting even today, and with the help of Erica Crawford from the Chamber of Commerce, we already started to talk to a few local companies that can participate in the project development.
We set a time for 11:15, so I've got to put a mark on the time.
Oh, one last point. We are a small company. We started as a small company. All the work that was done on our private money. I mean, physical people money. However, we do have a project partner. We are going through the closing of the financing in about a month or two, maybe. I will be able to bring that partner to you and introduce them to European offshore wind developer. It is not an oil company. It is a true offshore wind developer with a lot of experience. So that's already basically in the final stages.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I don't have any speaker slips for this item, but just questions from council real quick. Any questions? So to my right, I'm always looking, but okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Ladies first. Thanks. Ella, thank you so much for this. I appreciate that. And by virtue of introduction, the mayor and I have been on a subcommittee and have worked, as appointed by the council, on this relationship over the past year or so. And the initial memorandum of understanding, which came to the council, was vetted and collaboratively worked on by us initially, and then also council as well. But there's a new player in town, and therefore it begs a question, and I just want to be clear about what we're getting into. I understand very much the benefits to the city with regard to this, and the benefits to the developer in terms of having this kind of agreement. It's the exclusivity issue now that concerns me the most, now that Statoil is a player. And so my question to you, Chris or staff, would be this. Precisely what does exclusivity mean now that we have another player in the field? Would there be limitations on any discussion and every discussion that we might have with them, or would that limitation of interaction be limited to just some specific items? So if I could get some clarification on that, it would be helpful for me.
The exclusivity agreement provides that a similar agreement shall not be entered into with another party. I don't read it as preventing the city from discussing with another party what type of agreement might be entered into if Statoil or another group were to actually win the lease. I think the key is that the city manager, if he or she believes that the developer no longer has a realistic opportunity to move forward, can cancel this agreement. And so my understanding is that at this point, the next step is who BOEM's going to award the lease to. And so after that award is made, then the city would either move forward with this, or they would cancel this agreement and work with someone else if they won that auction. My understanding is that there's not a whole lot to be discussed between now and the lease auction, but perhaps Marty might have some more thoughts on that. But that's my understanding of how this agreement works. I also know from discussions with Trident that the exclusivity agreement may or may not provide additional points during the BOEM lease auction, and so I would think that the council would consider in the end, if they believe that Trident is a good partner, do they want them to get the lease or not? And if they do want them to get the lease, this exclusivity section helps them get it. But at the end of the day, it's a policy decision whether it stays in there. If that answers your question.
Not quite. So maybe, I'm sorry, maybe Marty could clarify for me. The way I read it is that it is actually on the effective date. There are some things that begin to happen, not when BOEM actually approves the developer that can develop the project. And so my question is, if that's true and we have this agreement, what limitations do I as a council member now have with another potential winner of the BOEM contract down the line? If it's awarded to Statoil, am I not able to talk to them as a council member for 5 years? Or if I can, what are the limitations?
If another party was awarded the lease, then I believe that at that point it'd be clear that the city manager would make a determination that Trident no longer has a reasonable opportunity to develop this project, so this would be canceled. There's a termination section in this CBA as well. And so if Trident doesn't get to the lease site, then this would be terminated and the city would negotiate with whoever got the lease site.
But this will be a 5-year process, probably, that before the award happens from BOEM. So between now and the next 5 years, what are my limitations in terms of a council member interacting with Statoil is my question. Does this preclude me from being able to do that? Marty, do you have any input on that?
I would think it doesn't preclude you from talking to other entities, but it prevents you and the city from entering into kind of any CBA with another entity.
Correct. Yes, I understand that.
But you could clearly go talk to another entity.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yes. If I may add a couple of things. First of all, the timing for the auction, assuming DOD can answer the questions, is about a year. Okay, it's not 5 years. It's the permitting that will take 5 years after you get the site control. But once you get the site control, then you know who the developer is. And so the question to you, is it 5-year period? No, it's only about a year, 2 years, I would say maximum, just because of the DOD delay. And also, John Pierce here, who is the legal counsel for Triton, you know, if you have any other questions, kind of legal questions, and maybe some other explanation in terms of regulations, he's here.
Well, my last question would just be this, and then you could maybe comment, because we're on a time limit. Just if you could just tell me, does exclusivity benefit you, or is there a differentiation? If this were not exclusive, would it not be of great benefit to you from the auction standpoint?
It does benefit. There's a scale, if you will, for BOEM's. You know, BOEM has the ability to evaluate whether it's an unenforceable agreement or it has value in terms of enforceability. Exclusivity helps us with that, and we have Trident has funding obligations in this interval. So starting from the effective date, and what we've included in our budget, what we're working on with our partner, is that there's going to be expenditures in the city and working with the city on job development and working on stakeholder development and all these other things that will flow as benefits to the city. That happens before the lease is actually issued, right? So those are things that essentially Trident is doing on the city's behalf. We're working together with the city. The Statoil is not going to do. And let me just make it very clear about Statoil. Statoil came in as kind of a free rider into this process. ALA and Trident really started the whole offshore wind industry in the United States, or off the West Coast, I should say. And so by filing this unsolicited bid, that kicked off this entire process, really literally caught the state by surprise, caught BOEM by surprise. She identified the resource. She's done all of this work, several years of work, you know, substantial expense and risk to herself and to her partners. That's been validated or valued by these partners. There's a competitive investment process. People are coming to Trident with term sheets, with investment proposals. We fixed on one partner that we think is probably the best because of experience, balance sheet, and other things. They are prepared to compete with Statoil on the bidding process with BOEM.
So I just didn't take a pause. We set a time for 11:15. We're at 11:15. And that's what we set the time for.
I move to go to 11:25.
We have a motion.
I'll second it.
A motion and a second. Mr. Heading and Ms. McPherson. Any discussion?
I see that this is going to be an endless, bottomless continuation until we do a vote. That setting a time limit is spurious.
I would agree. I would just say let's go beyond 11:15 and get it over with, I think is the request. So if you wouldn't mind amending your motion, so if it's 11:31, we don't have to worry about it. Can we just do that?
I'll amend the motion to continue this on until completed.
I'll second.
Motion and a second has been amended. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Thanks, Fred. So let's move on then. Yep, let's move on.
I just want to finish that. Is that this kind of project will be a 30-year, perhaps longer, probably be repowered, will create substantial employment in the area. So you're talking about something that's well offshore, not going to be seen, that will benefit the marine trades here. They'll be operated from facilities that will be based here, and the erection and so on that will take 7 or 8 or more years will be operated or based out of Morro Bay. So you're talking about skill sets, engineering, marine trades, a lot of things that will be happening out of here that won't be transient. That'll be essentially permanent installations here or employment in the region.
Okay.
But, well, now that I have more time, I just have one. I'll just say thank you for that. I wanted to just preface this last question by saying the Trident Wind folks have been excellent community partners. They have been wonderful to work with, very proactive in the community, and very engaging with regard to the appropriate constituents that they need to be engaged with. And so I did want to preface that I'm asking these hard questions because they're community questions that people ask me that are important questions that need to be vetted through this process. And so thank you for your candid answers. I appreciate it. Ella, thank you as always for your work.
Thank you.
Marlis?
And John asked most of the questions that I had, and I'm going to forego the one that he didn't ask because I think we want to make a decision.
Go ahead, Matt. Before you go, just in case. Go ahead, Matt. All right. So I do have a brief question because we, as a subcommittee, have had the opportunity to sit down with you and your other partner, Eric Markel, and have been very good to work with, which I'll acknowledge. Forgive me, I'm kind of the last minute, been kind of busy, but reached out to some of our commercial fishermen and talked to them about this agreement. And in the initial conversation, you talked about a community that basically stopped one of these projects, and we need to have the community behind this. I haven't got that affirmation from our commercial fishermen, or at least the one that I've talked to right now, and the others that I understand that aren't here, and the other one that happens to be president of the Moore Bay Fishermen's Commercial Fishermen's Association, wasn't able to reach. So I just have to share that because I think it's you have demonstrated a good partnership, and I'm sorry to bring this up at this part of the hour, but frankly, this all happened at the end of the day today, so it's happening. I'm having this discussion with you now, but I'm cautious about this because I even had to read the language on page 2 of 5 where it says there's a fisherman's agreement, which is supportive, but haven't had my understanding as of later today, there hasn't necessarily been the outreach with our commercial fishermen that I guess I had an expectation of. So it's a little surprise to you to have this conversation. It was a little bit of surprise to me because I know there has been outreach going on. So I share a little caution in going forward tonight. And if we truly want our buy-in from that to move forward, that we would want that commercial fisherman component buy-in before we move forward on this. Those are my comments, and I know the rest of the council. I'm sorry to catch off guard like that, but it was very last minute.
Well, let me address that question. We started I think going back to the beginning. We had about 5 meetings with commercial fishermen. And we met with them on the 13th of April. We sat down, I think there were about 7 or 8 of them in San Luis Obispo before the CEC workshop, and we talked about the agreement with the fishermen. They appointed, it wasn't Tom, I can't remember the guy whom they appointed that will be the point person, and then they all disappeared and said, come back in the fall because we're all out at sea. And I remembered last year when we were trying to get a hold of them and hold all these discussions, we had to wait till about October timeframe when the prime fishing season was over. So we talked then, we agreed what will be done, and then the comment came back, just wait through the summer, we'll get back to it in the fall. And that's what we're waiting for. So come September, I want to restart this, and our intent, exactly as we told them, is that it's not just the community benefits. We want them to be a part of the project, literally and legally. And what it means is there could be various forms of how they become that part of the project, but timing-wise, they're just not there. And they ask to wait till the fall.
Those are my comments. I'll turn it over to my colleagues. And Yeah.
And in a way, if you read the language there, it says that we should put that agreement, I think it's like as soon as possible or right after this is signed. And yeah, we have full intention to do it.
Yeah.
But you need the other party to be able to communicate.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry.
I have no comments. I'm ready to move forward on this.
Thanks. Brett?
I wonder if I could ask some questions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everybody else has. You should be able to.
In the CBA, you say that you're going to promote local economic development, which includes local hiring of city residents. And what will they be hired to do?
There is quite a number of people that are in Morro Bay with the skill sets that we can use. There is a company that does underwater surveys. We have to go and characterize the site. Of course, we're going to start with them. Now, that particular entity will have to go and arrange all the right equipment and boats and whatever, but we can literally start with companies and skills and available resources that exist in Morro Bay. We just met today with a communications company. Well, that's the company I'm going to start working on communications plan. That's what we're going to do. It is directly contracting to the city businesses that have the right experience, skills, and can participate immediately. If they will be those that have skills that need to be retraining, example, when the Diablo Canyon shuts down, you're going to have quite a number of electricians, but they're not electricians that work on offshore turbines. So they will need the training because turbine is a turbine. One is up, one is down, okay? But it's a turbine. It works the same way. So you need additional training, and we will do that so that they can be retrained to work offshore. Obviously, we're not going to need nuclear engineers. We're not doing anything nuclear. So there will be some skill sets that are transferable. There will be some that are not transferable. But those are transferable. We will certainly look locally to try to use as many businesses as possible to work on the project.
Okay. Can you build me a picture then of what your full-time operation here is going to look like? Is this is it going to be a beehive of activity going on and on into the future to operate and maintain these turbines?
I can envision a monitoring station here that monitors performance of the whole farm, and that's, I can't tell you exactly how many people it's going to take, but somebody has to monitor. It's like a control center, okay? Everything happens here. The limitations of the harbor, because it's a shallow harbor, it's a marine protected environment, we can't really use the harbor to do heavy construction work or heavy maintenance work, but we can use the existing facilities, maybe even part of the power plant that at some point will not be, would be stripped down and then just a shell, but we can certainly use it for storage of the parts and routine maintenance. When it comes down to major maintenance, it will have to go to a different facility where the physical infrastructure permits you to do it. So would it be a beehive? I don't know about the beehive, but monitoring for sure. Maintenance for sure. Education center for sure. Tourism, and I can guarantee you there will be ecotourism coming to town because of the project.
And that's a part that I don't quite understand. We have wind turbines over the horizon that are not visible from the shore. How is that a draw for tourists?
Well, some entrepreneur is going to create a company to take tourists to the wind farm. That's what they do in Europe.
They're doing that off Block Island and Rhode Island now.
If you look at the Block Island, that's a good point. There is a ferry company. I think it's called Block Island Ferry Company. Just take a look at their business increase just because of the time. They contracted the Block Island Ferry Company to do all the transportation of all the people and equipment to the farm. And now the tourists are being shuttled. So just going to that particular example, you can see that particular company's business increase as a result of the wind farm installation.
Okay, I really, that's hard for me to accept, but that people would take a boat ride to look at a wind farm. But if you say that that actually happens, I can't argue with that.
Well, I guess I can try to get some data from the economic benefits that the Black Island realized, in particular, that particular company is a very direct example, and try to provide that to you, if that will help.
Sure.
I just want to be clear for our listening audience. I think sometimes the conversation seems as though this project is inevitable, and I think we need to. My message, I want to make sure that there's a long process to go through. There's a lot of environmental studies. There's no guarantee that this is going to happen. So I need to say that for our viewers out there that are listening to this, wondering, like, when is this all going to happen? Yep. And so I think that needs to be part of the message today. And so that's what
you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and so
it's going to take 5 to 7 years to permit, and there is no guarantee that even after we do all the permitting, that we'll get an installation lease. That is absolutely correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other further comments? Ready to go ahead? Go ahead if there's a motion or anything else.
I guess at this time, no, I don't guess it. At this time, I'm not comfortable moving forward with the agreement.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yes, sir.
If we had any public comment, we'd probably want to.
Thanks,
Make sure
reminder.
we hear.
There's no speaker slips, but I will open it for public comment. Thank you, Chris. And Terry's coming up, even though he doesn't have a speaker slip. He's here. You're welcome. If you're going to stay here, you're welcome to.
At this hour, how can you say no?
No way.
I'll be brief.
All right, thank you.
A couple of things. I sent an email out on this project when it first came out, and I had a couple of concerns then. It is true that it's over the horizon from line of sight at shore. This site is not over the horizon as viewed from San Luis Obispo County's probably most pristine and valuable tourism resource, Hearst Castle. I am very concerned that a lot of effort is being spent on a project that will never pass muster with the state of California's Parks and Rec Department, because they are not going to weigh in a positive way on anything that's going to be in the viewshed of Hearst Castle. Having said that, I'll leave it up to the applicant to figure out whether they really need to go further with it. Secondly, that in the same email that I sent out, the Diablo Canyon shutdown and the offshore conditions and the potential for a lease site offshore Diablo Canyon provides the same electrical link and power situation without any of the viewshed issues, and Port San Luis provides a much greater potential for a heavy industrial port to do the layout, the service, and the construction of all of the offshore towers. These towers are the size of the offshore oil platforms in the Channel Islands or larger, and are going to be quite conspicuous, but only if you are on shore where you can see them. And off Diablo Canyon is a great place. The bottom conditions are shallower, the anchorage conditions are better. I think that the applicant would be much better advised to go to Diablo Canyon area. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Anybody else for public comment? I'll close public comment, bring it back.
Thank you.
I'll open for public comment for a response, just for the sake of information, but we do really need to wrap this up. If you could be quickly, thank you.
One with respect to the view shed and so on. These would be, if you see them at all, you might see them at night on a very, very clear night. And even then, the FAA lighting, the red light that flashes comes on with radar. So it's completely dark unless there's a flight overhead or something of that nature. The other, with respect to Diablo, there is no resource in Diablo. There is no resource in Diablo. So, the resource that exists and the one that's viable is here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring it back to close public comment and bring it back. Thank you.
Thank
go ahead,
you,
John.
At this time, I am not comfortable with personally going forward with the agreement for a number of reasons. One, I do find it nebulous. I agree with Councilman Davis with regard to really trying to understand and see the significant community benefits, although I think if this does move forward, there will be preferential, hopefully, hiring in the area, but I don't see some of the other items as being things that might come to fruition. Number two, I'm concerned about the issue that the mayor brought up and the fishing community. I do realize that they're not often available, but the assumption really is on moving forward with this is that there's significant buy-in from their leadership, and what I'm hearing tonight is we don't have that at this time. And then thirdly, from day one, I've had conversations with the city manager, former city manager, interim city manager, and former city manager, and my partner on the council in terms of the subcommittee with regard to exclusivity. There's a new player that has come in personally. I've had one meeting with that player and trying to fully understand where they fit in all of this. I haven't comfortably vetted all of the information I feel I need to have to make a decision on moving forward with a preferential agreement at this time. And so I would be inclined not to move forward with this at the present time until those things were cleared up for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any other comments? Red?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what's best for Morro Bay. Right now we have two firms competing for a wind farm. And so my question to myself is it in our best interest to tie ourselves to one of those? Jamie, the mayor mentioned the CFO. Tom Hafer emailed me this morning, the president of Morro Bay CFO, and he asked that the city delay any action on the CBA until the fishermen are back in town. And he said also that Noah Oppenheimer, who is president of, wait for this, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, PCFFA, also wants to make a presentation to the city. I just now looked up the Block Island Ferry Company. I looked under all of their tabs, special packages, island information, what to do, attractions. Nowhere is there any mention of the wind farm. There are lighthouses and burros and llamas and waves, but there's nothing on the website. So I don't understand if they are transporting thousands of tourists, why they don't advertise that on their website. I would be happy to continue our relationship with Trident under the existing MOC, and I would be happy to sign an MOC with Statoil or any other organization that wants to pursue a wind farm. But I don't see any advantage to our city to sign an exclusive agreement with one company and close the door on another company. I would rather see a healthy competition between all the companies on an equal basis. And I think that's where the Morro Bay's best interests lie. And so I would vote not, I will vote to not sign the CBA.
All right, Matt, go ahead.
If I could comment, yes, I think the one thing that I think was going back on this in the last year and a half, talking about these two players coming into it. Trident has been very forthright dealing with the city. The one thing that I would say, if we're going to postpone a vote, is talking to the commercial fishermen. They're very significant for our town, and along the way they've said, hey, we'd like to be in this discussion, let's wait till fall. With that, in terms of the two players that are presenting this proposal, Trident, I think, is the better of the two in terms of what they are offering the city, but I do not mind postponing this until we have the fishermen come back.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for all the comments. I echo a lot of the sentiment, and thanks, Red, for some of your information on that as well. I think, first of all, I agree with the MOC and that portion of our agreement. I would entertain an exclusive agreement if it were under the right conditions, personally. But sorry for the late information with our fishermen, but we owe it to them. I mean, we owe it to our commercial fishermen to have a fair shake at what their concerns are, and I don't have that personally. So that's my position. So if something, if there's different communication and different support from our fishermen at a later date, and this makes sense, I could support it. But tonight, I can't support it. So I don't know if we necessarily make a motion, but that we deny it. Other than there's no consensus to move forward with that. Marlis, I'm waiting to hear from you as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think we need to get input from the fishermen. I do recognize that Trident has really made a great effort, to get involved with this community, and we should recognize that. So again, I would agree with you, Mayor Irons, that we could consider an exclusivity agreement in the future, but we just need more information.
Totally. I applaud Trident's work with the city and outreach and stuff, totally, but at this time, can't support it.
Mr. Mayor, one option would be to just indefinitely continue the item without voting up or down the contract. If the council is going to wait for feedback from the fishermen and look at other options on whether they want to approve the contract, or the council could just simply pass a motion to deny the contract.
And even that wouldn't stop us from bringing it back if that were the case.
That would not.
Either way, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for.
So I'll move that we not approve the CBA as proposed, but continue with the existing, I want to get this right, memorandum of cooperation with Trident Wind, and at a further date, after obtaining further information from our fishing community and other information, that this be brought back for consideration in the future.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Heading, second by Ms. McPherson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries 5-0. Okay. And with that, we're not going to proceed with item C5. Our next, are there any future agenda items at this point? I think we should, anything? Good. Then I'll take adjournment, and our next regular meeting will be held on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2017 at 6 p.m. Yes, sir.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just introduce briefly our interim finance officer who is going to start working for us tomorrow, finance director, Andrew Hamilton. If you'd stand up,
Andrew, welcome. Thank you for sticking this out.
Andrew will start tomorrow. He'll work with us at least for a couple months, probably 3 days a week. He brings to us years of experience working in a water district, and don't hold this against him, but he's also a council member in a community in Southern California.
Oh, my goodness.
All right. Well, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Marty. With that, if there are no more comments, the meeting will be adjourned. Thank you.